Okay. We should be live. And yeah, I'm going to be eating Chipotle during this because I can't plan. I'm just so bad at it. Like time management wise, I'm so bad. Of course, I get like the chewy steak. Buy Halo? Where? No, I'm not buying the Master Chief Collection. I always hated the Xbox controller, like how big and like bulky it was. Even back when like the PS4 controller was like, or no, not the PS4, but like back when like the old PS like 2 controller was like smaller. Like, you know, like the PS1 controller was like tiny. PS2 and PS3 I think kept it the same, and then the PS4 they kind of bulked it up a little bit, and I liked that a lot. But the Xbox controller I always felt was too big. Like the original Xbox controller, I hated it. I don't know if it's gotten like better. Has it? I don't know. Like maybe it's gotten like smaller. I don't know how that works, but dare disrespect my sacred controller. Buy the Master Chief Collection. I know Steven. You know what? I'm gonna do it for you, Steven. Fuck you, Mountie. I'm doing it for Steven, not you. I was just at Chipotle, and there was some little bitch in front of me who was like being super rude to the people working there. I hate people like that. Like, everyone has bad days, but shit, man. Don't be rude to people just doing their job. Small hands. All right. So let's just jump right into this. Welcome, everyone. This is the live... Yeah, there's a tornado warning in Chicago, so if the stream, like, goes out for any reason, or if I have to, like, duck and run, just keep that in mind if that's why I, like, duck out or something. So, we are doing the live stream of the Reddit AMA with MensLib. Again, big shout out to Mikael and Matt for coming on to talk. I uploaded that video a couple days ago. It was a really good talk. And thanks again for doing this. This is really cool. Oh, there's CJ. What's up, CJ? Welcome, CJ. We're doing a Reddit AMA. So I've never done an AMA. I didn't know how to do one, and I was like super nervous, and I asked Mikael, I'm like, how do you do this? And he's like, it's super simple, just chill. And apparently you just make a post, and then people ask questions, and then you come back later and you answer the questions. But we decided to do a live stream of it, so I'm going to answer the questions, obviously, like type-wise, but then I'm going to like vocalize them with you guys here. But then if you can't stay here long, or if you miss it, you will have the link of the answers on the Reddit AMA thread. I think I put in the link to this. I think I did. If I didn't, tell me, because obviously I'm an idiot if I didn't. But yeah, I was just like, hi, I'm Mac from Macabre Storytelling. Yeah, it's weird looking back to think that the channel started off with the Game of Thrones. I mean, like, it started off with the Tyrion video, obviously. That was, like, the first big one. But, like, the real thing that kind of made it grow was the Game of Thrones rewrite series, and that was a blast. But, yeah, then I was afraid it was going to get, like, pigeonholed into... in the community page. Okay, good. Thank you, Monty. I didn't want to, like, be, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Pigeonholed into anything. But here we are. World War II freak. What's up, man? All right, so let's just hop right into it. Basically, I'm just going to scroll down, and then as I get to the questions, I'll just go, like, whatever the top ones are, I'll just go there and go down. Restored. Oh, there's my stuff. Thank you very much. Okay, so first question we have is, are there any male, from Penguin with a mustache, hello, Penguin, are there any male characters in modern media that you would hold up as examples of what a better form of masculinity could look like? So, just wait, Majuka. I will. So modern media examples of like strong masculinity. I don't know, like in terms of modern, like in terms of like now, I don't know, just because I am someone who is very I don't like watch a lot of TV. It sounds weird, but like, you know, like even movies, I'm very like particular with my shit. And so I don't actually like know like in the now, but I guess I'll like in terms of masculinity, in terms of media that I'm just exposed to, I guess, and like it's more modern, you know, from like the 90s, not like, you know, in the, like the 70s, 80s, all that shit. You know, I've told before on the channel, you know, my dad wasn't really around when I was younger, but it was funny because I did feel like I did get a good sense of masculinity, not only from the people around me, but from media too, in a sense. When I was growing up, I watched Full House, you know, with Danny, Joey, and Uncle Jesse and Uncle Joey, the three dudes raising three daughters in the house. And funny because looking back, like when I watched it, I didn't really like pick that up. I'm like, oh my god, here are like these three dudes raising like three daughters together, and they're like super compassionate and like empathetic. But also then you have, you know, like Joey, who's still like, you know, a comedy, and then Jesse's like sort of like the rocker dude. They still have very like, you know, traditionally masculine hobbies or like, you know, vibes to them. So I always thought that was really good. Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World. Oh, Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World, but Mr. Matthews from Boy Meets World. Corey's dad. Hang on, let me look him up. Mr. Matthews. William Ruck. Where is he? Open image, a new tab. Yeah, here we go. So let me pull him over. Yeah. William Ruck, he was Corey and Eric's dad. He was always, I thought, a very good look at like just like a very traditional masculine. Like, you know, he ran a grocery store and he was very, you know, he set boundaries, but he was also extremely empathetic to his children when it counted. The one thing I remember that I really loved was from his character. There was that scene. Remember the episode of Boy Meets World where Sean joins a cult because, you know, his dad, you know, he's sort of this lost and doesn't know what to do. And, you know, the whole family's trying to get him away from, or not his family, but like, you know, his friends, Corey and them. They're trying to get him away from the cult, like the, you know, like the youth cult or whatever the fuck. I forget what his name was. They hugged a lot. It was really weird. And Eric really wanted to go because he liked all the chicks. So they're in the hospital after Mr. Turner. They're in the hospital after Mr. Turner gets in a motorcycle accident. Mr. Turner was actually another an excellent form of view of masculinity, I would say. You know, he's like a teacher. He's you know, he like rides the motorcycle. He's kind of like, you know, traditionally like a guy's guy, but the way he is so empathetic to Sean and looks out for Sean and takes Sean in, that I thought that was very beautiful. Unfortunately, the show didn't think so because they just wrote Mr. Turner off. They took Sean's like his most like crucial dynamic in the show, aside from like, you know, like Corey, like, you know, no, maybe even so. I think that Mr. Turner was like he was Sean's most crucial dynamic in the show of Boy Meets World. And they just wrote him off after season 4, I think, which was so stupid. But yeah, Mr. Turner, Boy Meets World had some really great male role models. Mr. Feeney, of course. Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince. He's another one that I spoken about before. But just the way he was a very, he seemed like a very strict man. He was a very again, he set boundaries. He was like a sort of like a stoic, strict man. But when it came time, it was Uncle Phil was good too, because I was talking about it earlier with my girlfriend. Uncle Phil was good too because he never when he let's say so he was very empathetic to his children and Will, and throughout the show he was very soft spoken, empathetic to them. However, when he was setting boundaries, like when he actually was like disciplining them or like reprimanding them, one thing I loved and I didn't notice until looking back is that he never did it in a way of like that was like sort of that was sort of like demeaning or demeaning, degrading in a sense. He never like talked down to them. When he was upset with his children or Will, he would always speak of it in the terms of like, I'm disappointed in you. Like, I know you're better than this and you're not meeting up to the potential. And that is why I'm angry. I'm not angry because I think you're a bad kid or because you're doing this. I'm mad because I know this isn't you. I know this isn't who you are, and you're not acting. You're not being yourself. You're behaving a different way or something along those lines. However, the one I wanted to mention, and I don't know if you guys even know what the fuck I'm talking about. Did you guys ever watch Smart Guy? It was on Disney Channel. Yeah, here it is. 1 second. Why is that thumbnail so small? Hey, why are the thumbnails so small? Damn it. Hang on, give me a second. No. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, here we go. So Smart Guy, I don't know if anyone even knows what fucking show I'm talking about. I feel like everyone should know what Smart Guy is, at least like if you're my age, like, in like your late 20s, because Boy Meets World used to be on Disney Channel. Which they would never do that now. They have Girl Meets World, but they kind of like toned it down. Because like Boy Meets World was pretty not risque. He wasn't the show wasn't like too risque, like, not like, but like, it had somewhat adult themes like drinking, sex, stuff like that. So I think Disney couldn't host it. They only did it for a while. They didn't host it for too long. Oh yeah, if you're watching this, you can always go to the thread and ask a question in here, and then I'll respond to it. Just I'll refresh the page after I go through and see if there's more that I didn't catch. But Smart Guy was a show that I watched when I was a kid all the time, and it's on Disney Plus now. So if you haven't seen it, you can check it there. I love this show. Like, so basically, it's about Taj Mahal. He's a kid, 10 years old, and he's like super smart. And he goes to high school with his brother. I confused him with the smart kid on My Wife and Kids. I don't think I've seen that one. But yeah, so he's like the smart kid, and he lives with his brother Marcus, their best friend Mo. He was the best character, and their sister Yvette. And it's funny because growing up, I'm actually bringing up Smart Guy I'm doing the forced diversity video. I'm bringing up Smart Guy in the sense of lens framing. Not really lens framing, but like sort of like the lens with which we see media. So, for example, when I was younger, I just saw Smart Guy as 1 second. We had an idiot in the chat. Sorry. When I was a kid, I was like, I never like, I watched a show. It basically was like, oh, it's about a kid and he goes to high school and he's got his brother and his dad and his little kid. Like, I never really saw it as like, that's just the show to me. Growing up and rewatching it, now that I'm sort of like more seasoned in when it comes to media and representation, rewatching it, I was like, holy fuck, dude, the show was like woke as hell. But like it didn't like mean to be, but it was like, you got this young black kid, he's like, and he's the smartest kid, and he goes to high school. And then so the main point is Floyd Henderson, the father in the show, is probably, I would check out Smart Guy if you really want a really good, healthy form of like a masculine archetype. Floyd in the show is the father. And again, when I was a kid, I didn't realize this, but I'm like, holy shit, like this is a piece of media that had a black father raising 3 children while running his own business. And I was like, holy, again, like the show never really brings it up in that context. But I was like rewatching it now through my lens of like, because I'm so used to talking about like representation and like social issues and media and stuff like that, rewatching it, I'm like, holy shit, wow, this was actually like a super awesome piece of representation. So Floyd Henderson, the father, what was so cool about him was that he was he's a single father raising his 3 kids. But he's also he has very like traditionally masculine traits. He like, there's an episode where he gets like a super like super awesome grill, and then like he just like goes out and buys like 50 pounds of meat, and just because he like wants to use it, and then like Yvette, the daughter, like opens the fridge and the freezer and it's just filled with just like frozen meat. He's a roofer. That's his business. He runs a roofing business. He likes football. He's like a traditional like goofy dad in many ways. A traditional like masculine dad. However, he also was incredibly soulful and empathetic and sensitive to his children. Very similar to Uncle Phil. It wasn't that sort of, I'm from Boston, so, there was a certain, not really in my family, but like with friends and like family, there was a certain tough love in the sense of, hey, if you did something bad, it was not like abusive, but like, there was like sort of like, what was it? Bill Burr said that. It was like, no, your mother never hit you, but there was the threat of it. In that neighborhood, there was more of like the father, the disciplinarian sort of father, like, like the rough and tough, like you were almost like you didn't want to do anything wrong because you were scared, in a sense, like that sort of thing. I don't really think that's as healthy. But Floyd, he was never like that. When he was angry at his kids and like he had to like discipline them, very similar to Uncle Phil. It wasn't in a sense of like, hey, you're being a bad person, I hate you, like, I don't like you. It was, I'm disappointed in you. Like, you're not being the person I know who you are. And that's why I'm upset. But he was very sensitive to his kids. He would listen to them. He was very empathetic, sympathetic to them. And so, yeah, I think that is a fantastic but he was never framed as if he was like this like sensitive, like, like a little wallflower. Like, he's like a big dude, has a roofing business, likes football and barbecue. But he's, so like that was a good hybrid. And again, same with Uncle Phil. Like he was like this big dude and he was like very intimidating. But then of course, when he was like, when he had to be, but when it actually came time to like reaching out to his kids or Will, they were very, very, very empathetic, very sensitive, very vulnerable. So yeah, it was kind of weird because I didn't really have my dad around when I was a kid. But I had like a lot of coaches, a lot of like my uncles, my coaches. I had a lot of very teachers. I had a lot of good, very good male role models in my life, aside from my dad, but media as well, because I watched a lot of movies. I watched a lot of TV when I was a kid. And I felt like, these were some really good ones, really it was funny because looking back, I never really even it kind of went over my head. I didn't realize it. But yeah. Okay. So yeah, just to name a few: Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince, Floyd Henderson from Smart Guy, and then like a lot of the guys, Full House. You know, the guys from Full House and the guys from Boy Meets World. Yeah, I'm kind of going through like I didn't even realize they were all like family sitcom dads, but like I think that's important, you know, because they often have like the family sitcom dad is like the doofus one, right? But in this show, not at all. In these shows, not at all. Like they did have them like be goofy, but they were still competent in many ways. Okay, hang on. Ow. Oh fuck. Hang on. Ow. Okay. Okay, second question. Warlord of Britannia. Could I ask two questions? What is a man philosophically speaking? I don't know if he... Yeah, because Finch is another really good example of a good masculine. Very sensitive, very soft-spoken, not really like... traditionally not traditionally masculine. Or like, when you think of like, like buff and like uses force, very soft spoken and whatnot. What is a man philosophically speaking? It's funny because when we talk about when I was kind of growing up, when I was sort of like learning more about social issues and sort of getting into and learning about sort of like transgender issues, it's so funny because like when you first start out, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. It's so simple, but like I'll get to that in a second. But at first, I feel like it kind of is hard for a lot of people to kind of get their head around because we sort of consider men in the sense of, whether it's physically, the perception of men, in terms of certain behavior. But when I after learning more about trans issues and, I kind of got it in the sense of like, they kind of clicked one day where it was like, it's hard to understand but then it's easy once you realize that gender and like sex and like sort of like, biology, these two things don't always, like we always think they align. We always like, and it seems like the majority of cases they usually do, but once you separate that of like separating gender and sex or like, sexual biology, it's very simple. So then we're just talking about gender. So like, what is a man? And in many ways, like there are certain, one of the big things that I don't like about a lot of definitions of current masculinity is the fact that it's based on a lot of particular behaviors as opposed to the underlying principles behind the behaviors. So for example, I go over this in my male dating video. To be a man, you have to be a provider. Which usually when we think of that, what we hear is like, to be a man, you have to go to work and make money, and so you can pay for the roof and food and clothes of your kids and your wife. That's sort of what we mean by provider. Whereas the feminine side is the nurturer, where she's the wife stays home with the kids and cares for them and comforts them and stuff like that. Make sure they don't get into the utility closet, stupid idiot little dumbass kids. However, in this sense, what we're doing is we're defining masculinity and femininity by certain behaviors, as opposed to looking at the underlying principle. So the example I use in the male dating video is like, hey, if this sort of dichotomy between masculinity and femininity, this dichotomy between provider and nurturer is, I think that's kind of silly in a sense, because when you think about it, again, if you're a man, whether you're a man who goes to work and pays for brings money home so you can pay for your kids, clothes and food and shit in your home, or you're a man and you stay home and look after your kids, and make sure they don't get hurt and teach them lessons and like comfort them. You're basically both being a nurturer and provider in a sense. Like obviously the words are different and they sort of like have different connotations, but sort of like the underlying principle is like you take care of who you love, your family, your kids, your wife, or spouse, doesn't matter. Working as a team to sort of like take care of everyone. And that's the underlying principle, right? And so that's sort of like why I don't like the archetype of a lot of masculinity that exists today, because it's based on behaviors as opposed to underlying principles. So for example, another example I used was like, hey, to be a provider, to be courageous, it doesn't mean you have to like tackle a robber during a liquor store holdup, or it doesn't mean you have to like lead men into battle in a war. Sometimes it just means if you get a scary phone call from a friend at 3 a.m., it's staying up with that friend until their parents get home to calm them down. And because we're not referencing masculinity based on certain behaviors, whether it's leading men or like, stopping, saving someone. It is the underlying principle. It's just being courageous, being there again, and being there for people around you. And ironically, I actually think there are actually many traditionally masculine traits that I actually think are antithetical to the principles. So, for example, we consider masculine in many ways, like, someone who's very abrasive in a sense, someone who's like not afraid of like, someone who's not afraid of like hurting people's feelings or standing up for themselves. However, it can kind of go too far and it becomes like sort of compensating, where you have a man who really wants everyone to know they're a man. So they sort of like they're like almost like needlessly abrasive. Like they're very rude to people in a sense. They're very like brutally honest, but not in the sense of like they're not being brutally honest because they are actually trying to help the person. They're doing it because they want everyone to think of them as like the alpha male. This sort of behavior to me, comes off as incredibly insecure. To me, that's not like, hey, this person is like a masculine person. It's like I would say that person is a very non-masculine person, because they are so uncomfortable in their masculinity that they have to compensate by trying to act a certain way. But it's very apparent, it's very transparent, and it is just very, it just comes off as non-masculine. One of the things I mentioned in the video, or maybe did I cut it out? I think I may have cut it out. I'm not sure. But there was that whole thing with Harry Styles wearing a dress on the cover of Rolling Stone or something, or Vogue or something, and Candace Owens, the great Candace Owens, who always has the best takes no matter what, she called him out like, men today are no longer men because we have men wearing dresses. Now the behavior is not masculine. Like, it's like, well, it's traditionally men don't wear dresses, right? However, the underlying principle is a man wears whatever he wants. He doesn't give a shit what anyone else. So like that's the thing. That's the contrast between the behavior of a man wearing a dress. So that's not masculine. But in this case, Harry Styles doesn't give it, like he's so masculine in the sense that like he doesn't give a shit what anyone thinks. I'm like, look, I'm so masculine. I wear what I want and I don't care what anyone else thinks, because I'm so secure in who I am and like my perception as a man. And so yeah, that's sort of like where we sort of like hit like a roadblock, is that people confuse traditionally masculine activities or behaviors with the underlying principles tied to masculinity, and I think that's what causes a lot of issues when we try to create a sort of like a template for masculinity. or like what does it mean to be a man? But philosophically speaking, I think that being a man is just it's a tool in a sense. It's a tool in a sense to give, boys and young men a template on how to be a good person. This is sort of why I don't like it when people think of masculinity and femininity as sort of opposites. They're different, they're complementary, but also I think both should be reframed into ways we can give to both young boys and young girls. They're just templates. They're just it's either male or female depending on the context, who you're talking to, a boy or a girl. But you're giving them a template on how to be a quality person and how to be a self-sufficient person. Ideally, as time goes on, what I'd like to see is that those underlying principles will eventually sort of overtake the more like superficial behaviors that are tied to masculinity and femininity. And once that happens, then masculinity and femininity will sort of be a bit more. I think in many there are certain due to biological preferences, like just society in general. I don't think gender roles are ever going to completely go away, just because there are some people who will hang on to them. There are biological imperatives, stuff like that. I don't think they'll go away completely. But I think as time goes on, we will be a lot looser with them. Eventually, you'll get to the point where it's like masculinity and femininity. We're kind of teaching. We're not really like giving them like certain behaviors. Like, hey, femininity, you have to stay at home and take care of the kids. Masculinity, you have to go and work. It's whether we're talking about masculinity or femininity. It's like, hey, you need to just take care of the people you care about. Whether that means you go and have to work and bring home money, or you stay home and cook food and clean the clothes. It doesn't really matter because both are masculine and feminine at the same time, because the underlying principle is take care of those you love, no matter what that means. So that's sort of, I don't know if I'm not really good at philosophy. Yeah, I think Destiny and I would like really see eye to eye on a lot. I really liked his stuff on, recently Destiny has been doing a lot of stuff in regard to, it kind of like what I went over in the male dating video about how obviously we're not on board with like a lot of like this cringy red pill shit, which is just a bunch of dudes who are just like, that's the thing with a lot of red pill. So these dudes are so insecure. Like it's hard for me to watch like red pill videos because it's so cringe. Because these guys like, they think they're, and like to a lot of their audience, they come off as like these like really secure males, like the secure alpha males. To me, watching it, because I've been through that, it's so apparent just how like insecure they are. It's like ridiculous. Like, oh, like I'm just like watching it like this is so cringe. Like you're like grown men and like you're talking like you're saying the shit that I did when I was like 15 and like I thought I was like an edgy, like, yeah, I'm a boss. Like, what are you doing? Like, everyone has this phase, but you're supposed to grow out of it, and you get older, and then you realize that, like, hey, I'm so self secure in myself and who I am that I don't really give a fuck how I'm perceived by others. Like for me, like I don't know, like, hey, do people from my channel, do they think I'm an alpha or beta? Like I don't care. Like I don't care. Like it's just like who cares? Whereas when you actually like look at these guys, it's so obvious that what they're doing is a front, that they're trying to like put up this perception. They're putting up this perception of what it's supposed to be a man. And maybe that's who they really are, but it's just so it's kind of pathetic sometimes. I almost kind of feel bad because I'm almost like, it's like you guys never got out of that like really bad insecurity stage, and so you're not men, you're little boys. That's a lot of people say that. It's like, oh, if you're not a man, then that's a dichotomy. It's like, oh, if you're not manly, then you're feminine. No. If you're not manly, you're childish. You're a little boy. You're not a man and woman isn't the opposite. It's a man and a little boy. The same way it would be with a woman and a little girl. It's not like masculine and feminine. It's it's like a grown adult. It's being responsible for yourself and having self-assurance, and being like, back when you were a young kid, when you were still trying to figure out the world and you weren't sure of yourself. And like, even as you get older, you still have like insecurities, and you still may not be entirely sure of yourself, but you sort of find a balance. You you find a path, and you start to like, sort of like find a good middle ground. Whereas when you're a kid, it's like you're a complete mess. You're just like, you're like, what do I do? How do I be a man? How do I grow up? How do I be an adult? All that shit. And again, it's so weird to see like all these dudes in like their 30s, and they're like, it's just like, they're just dripping insecurity. And that's why they feel the need to go out and brag about their like lay count, and like, oh, I pulled this 10, and they want to date hot women, not because they want to like have sex with hot women, because they want people to see them dating hot women, so they look good in the perception of others. AKA, they are seeking validation from those around them. AKA, which is, I would say, the hallmark of what still characterizes you as like a little boy. It's like, when you come up, we always need reassurance, but as you get into an adult, you kind of have a self-sustaining validation. You're validating in yourself. You don't necessarily need constant validation as you would when you were like a kid. But all these dudes, they just never grew out of it. And that's like, that's why, like, I would say like they're little boys, because they just never grew out of that phase. And maybe that's because they didn't have solid role models. Maybe it's because of other reasons. But if I might be sympathetic for you, but if you're going to keep pushing this crap to other guys and making them more miserable, I don't have patience for that, and I'll shoot it down every single time. Okay, yeah, so hopefully that answered the question. It was kind of meandering. Hi, Mac. Thank you for joining this evening. I have 2 questions. Since the channel is called Macabre Storytelling, does this represent a change in direction for you, or shall we see spooky content from you in the future? Well, it's funny, because when I first started the channel, the idea of it, like, everyone always asks, like, why Macabre Storytelling? So macabre means like, it means like deathly or like horrific. And so the idea was like that I would use the channel to speak of bad writing. I would like take bad writing that I thought, and I would make a channel based around that. So like my first video was like why removing the Taisha confession ruins Tyrion's arc. So that was sort of like, again, it was sort of like bad writing and trying to like show like, hey, here's why it's bad. My second video was why the Departed sucks. Obviously, I kind of tried like my Rage Bro vibe. It didn't really work. I'm not really good at that. And then the Black Panther video. And then when the Game of Thrones rewrite stuff took off, it was more of like, okay, we'll still talk about stuff where I think that there is. I'll talk about why. So for me, when I'm trying to like teach writing, really bad movies or shows don't work, because that's just like, there's such a clusterfuck. Here's the metaphor I use. Here's sort of like the metaphor I use. Let's say you're trying to see a picture like a puzzle, and there's like puzzle pieces, right? A really, really bad movie, the puzzle pieces are just scattered everywhere, and they're not put together, and it's just a complete mess. And then you ask someone like, what is the picture of? What is the puzzle the picture of? And it's like, well, I don't know. It's a mess. And that's kind of how I feel about bad movies. They're very hard to teach people how to like improve as a writer, because they're such clusterfucks that like, where do you even begin, right? How do you critique a movie that is like The Room, like Tommy Wiseau? That movie is so bad. Like, how do you even begin to talk about how it's a bad movie? It's almost like, where do you even start? However, on the flip side, then there are movies that are like really, really good, like classics. So like take The Godfather. I think The Godfather is like probably the closest to like a perfect movie. It's like, it's cliche, but like, in terms of like perfect construction, it's pretty much perfect. There's like almost nothing wrong with it. However, part of the reason I don't like to use really, 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 really good movies as teaching tools, when it comes to writing is because take the puzzle metaphor. Now the puzzle is perfectly put together and all you see is like the picture, like the movie as it is. However, because it's so perfect, you almost can't tell how everything fits together. Like, it's hard for me to break down The Godfather because everything flows so perfectly in terms of character and arcs and stuff like that. Like, I could actually sit down and maybe, you know, and we could do it, but like, it's just that it's such a perfect machine. It's almost harder to teach where, like, sort of like how it all, because you'll end up just praising it. Like, hey, this does this really good. As opposed to like actually like, you know, being able to teach people writing lessons. However, then there's the middle pack, and these are the movies that I think that are the perfect ones for teaching tools. And they're movies that are like a 7 out of 10. They're like decent. They're like, they have a lot of potential, but they have slip ups here and there. The reason I like doing, and this is sort of like where the One Fatal Flaw series came from. Hey, this is like a really, really good movie, but here's one place where it falters. The reason I like doing that is because if we take the puzzle metaphor, let's say the puzzle is perfectly complete, right? The puzzle is perfectly complete, except it's missing like 3 or 4 pieces, right? Now, when that happens, when you have a puzzle that's just missing 3 or 4 pieces, you can still see what it's a picture of, right? I can still see it's a house or a farm or a boat or whatever. But I still can see the missing parts. I can see where it's missing. And that's sort of how I feel with like a lot of movies that are the best teaching tools, where I can tell what it's trying to do and it's really close to like getting there, but because it's so good in some parts, the parts where it fails are easier to pick out and recognize. And that is, for me, where we can look at a movie and deconstruct it and find out where it falters. So, for example, one of the, you know, I Am Legend, for one of the One Fatal Flaw movies, that movie I think is like really good up until like the third act, and then it falters. And so we can sort of like, because it has like a lot of good and a lot of bad, you can kind of like see how it doesn't fit together. Same thing with the Game of Thrones rewrite series. There was a lot of good material there, but the little changes they made where things went wrong, they're very easy to pick out because everything else around it's really good. So there's a contrast there. But then, like, say, look at Game of Thrones Season 8, which is such a clusterfuck. I don't know how to even... Like, obviously we did the rewrite, but if you guys know the rewrite, I tore Season 8 down and, like, rebuilt it from the ground up, basically. Because it was so bad that I couldn't even salvage it. It's sort of like, think of it like a car engine. If it's just a complete piece of shit, completely broken, well, screw it. Just like, what am I gonna do? Like, put it all back together and try to fix it? Like, it's not even worth it. Whereas if you have like an engine that's like basically decent, but it's like missing a few things, okay, now we can actually go in and like tighten the screws and put in new parts and shift things around, and you can fix it. But like Game of Thrones season 8, like it was such a train wreck that like I don't even know where do I even begin? How do I even fix this without like starting from the beginning and like completely rebuilding it from the ground up? I think I really like finding movies, and again, this is where the One Fatal Flaw series came from, where it's like this close to perfect, except for a few things. And I think that being able to find out where a really good movie falters, even in the slightest, I think being able to recognize that allows you as a writer to then take that eye to your own writing. So when you're writing your script, you can look back and say, oh, this is really good, but oh, this doesn't work. And you can sort of like be a bit more, you can, not really picky, but you sort of have a more, you sort of train yourself to have a more critical eye when it comes to the smaller things as opposed to things as a whole. You know, it's easy to say, oh, this was bad. It's like, okay, well, why is it bad? Break it down. Why is it actually bad? And what doesn't work about it? What works and why why, and then what doesn't work and why doesn't it work compared to everything else. And that's kind of what we did with the Game of Thrones rewrite was, hey, the Hound's arc doesn't work at the end, but instead of just saying it's bad, hey, the reason it doesn't work is because what came before it doesn't match up. The Hound's arc up until like season 7 is about forgiveness and letting go of revenge, and then the last season has him go out, desire revenge for basically no reason. Or Jaime's arc is another perfect example. It's not just that Jaime's arc is bad, like the ending of his arc is bad, it's why doesn't it work? And why you have to actually describe why doesn't it work. You can't just say it's bad, you have to actually go back and say how come it doesn't work compared to everything else we saw. Why is it bad in your eyes? And it's kind of fun because, again, with like sort of like how we did with Dany, anything, the ending of Dany's arc doesn't work because it doesn't really match up with what came before it. However, we kind of went in and reverse engineered like, hey, here's a scenario where the show could have actually made this work. So the end of Dany's arc, the end of Jaime's arc, the end of the Hound's arc, these things could have worked if they had given more care before and put in the work and put in the beats. And sort of like made it coherent in a sense. They didn't just throw it in there because whatever. I don't know. But to answer the question, yeah, basically the channel right now is like it has kind of gone through like an identity crisis because of the male dating video and the male body video. Those blew up and like gained me a shit ton of subs, and so people are kind of like, is this a social issues channel, like a breadtuber channel, or is this like a writing channel? It's kind of both. It's just like kind of what it's right now. It's like kind of whatever I want. I don't really want to be tied down to a like, hey, I do this sort of video. We do writing advice, we do shit posting, we do video games, we do social issues, we do, ideally what I think sort of like if I had to like sum it up, it would be discussing media through a social lens. So for example, I think the Seinfeld video is a really good example of sort of like a hybrid of what the channel I really want the channel to be, where it's like, hey, we're breaking down writing in the sense of, hey, here, like, the whole thing was like, hey, here's why the Seinfeld ending sort of works, but also here's why people didn't like it. So you're simultaneously critiquing the writing and like character consistency and character arcs and breaking down the actual writing and structure of the show, while also discussing sort of how the media fits into social issues, and sort of like sociology, psychology. The male dating video and even the male body video kind of, I feel like, do that to some extent. They are social issues, but they're still discussing media in a sense. They're still discussing what I would say narratives. When we talk about storytelling or narratives, we don't just mean like fictional stories. We also mean stuff like narratives in the news, ideologies, rhetoric. In Red Pill, there are certain narratives. That all women are whores. That all women want men who are just gonna all women want Chad Thundercock. And it's because of these narratives that a lot of guys end up getting lost because they buy into it, and then they go out into the world, realize that it's not the truth, and they just get lost. Same thing with the male body video. It's instead of changing the narrative of, hey, these men should be celebrated because they're putting the hard work in, change the narrative to, hey, should we keep an eye on this? Like, do male celebrities feel an intense pressure to measure up or achieve a certain body type for the media, even if it is causing them distress? So that is sort of ideally what I would want the channel to be, but then you have stuff like the Soprano video that I just released. We're just sort of like writing analysis or a character analysis. So it kind of just, I don't know, just basically whatever I want. And I kind of feel good that it seems like you guys have been receptive to all of it. Whatever you get, you're like, cool. Because yeah, I just don't want to get pinned down to one thing. Because I don't want to start like, hey, I have a good idea for a video. It doesn't really fit the channel though. It's like, fuck that. I don't care. I just want to make it. And again, I kind of the chaotic good is sort of like the theme of the channel, so it kind of works. It's like it's just kind of nuts in a sense. In recent years, us moderators have had to move the sub away from talking about heterosexual dating, as it's difficult to give personal advice on a one-to-one basis to someone you don't know personally. On the other hand, the problem with general advice for a large audience is that it isn't applicable to everyone. You've shown an interest in dating as a topic in your videos and on call with Matthew and Mick. Do you have any thoughts about how you might approach this in the future? Do you have any thoughts about how we might approach this topic? So I think the question is, how do you find the line between general advice, sort of like generic advice, and more specific, helpful advice? And it's funny because that's sort of like what my issue with like red pill, or not really red pill, but like pickup artistry is, where the generic advice of just like, hey, be yourself, hey, be nice, hey, that doesn't really help, because you're not really giving them a game plan. It's like telling someone who like, hey, I want to get strong, then go lift. Well, yeah, but like what exercises, how often? However, you don't want to go too far in the other direction where it gets to be like rigid as hell, which is what happens in pickup, where they're like, all women like this, so you have to do this, and you have to exactly say these words, and this is exactly how you get her in the bed. Like, it's just not how that works. It's a lot more complicated. It's finding that sweet spot between how do you give good advice without being too specific? Because if you're too specific, you're going to alienate people. I think what this is in reference to is sort of, if you actually look at like a lot of red pill, it's actually red pill. Very rarely does red pill ever really discuss homosexual relationships. They hardly even discuss like racial components too. Basically, it's all just heterosexual male, and like that's if that's the audience, yeah. But like if we're actually trying to give dating advice, how do we do that? And I think that the only way you can do it is via different perspectives, like because you can't do it all on your own. Like, so for example, one thing about the dating video is a lot of people said, hey, you didn't really talk about like, racial components, and you didn't talk about like, how this applies to like homosexual relationships. Or even like if we're talking masculinity, how does like someone being transgender fit into that, a trans man? And it's part of the reason I didn't wasn't because I don't like care about those issues, but it's because I just didn't have I didn't feel like I had part of the reason I think made the video that resonated with so many people, because it was very personal. I came from a very personal place. So I think the key is to not try to do it all yourself. It's to get as many different perspectives, a lot of different perspectives, and bring them in with a common goal. So that's why, Belong, who is the therapist who we had spoken, I want to bring him back on, because he really wanted to speak about, hey, here's my experiences dating as an Asian male. And obviously we have, as two men in the dating world, we have a lot of common ground, but me being white, him being Asian, or if a guy is black, or, whatever race or ethnicity, that's going to be a different experience that so like there's a common element, but then there's specificity. But you can't just give the common, because then it becomes too generic. I think the key is to just take as many perspectives as possible. And that's why I think it was actually, to your point, I think, Mick, I think we were talking about that, or it may have been Matt, during my chat with them, was people go to MensLib and they're like, hey, how come you're talking about black issues? How come you're talking about gay issues? And it's like, well, because there are black men, because there are gay men, because there are trans men. It's sort of this, like, when we think of like men's issues, we think of like, hey, here's how is something, let's just talk about stuff that only pertains to all men. And it's like, well, you can't really do that, because then you kind of get tunnel vision. You actually have to take an intersectional lens to it, because again, it's like, my experiences dating as like a white man are going to be a lot different than a black man. We're going to have a lot of similarities, of course, the same sort of like, there's going to be a lot of crossover, but then there's going to be another element to it that is going to be completely different. Or if an Asian man or something like that, Asian men are usually seen as less masculine. Black men can be seen as either sometimes less desirable, or they can be like hypersexualized. So it's I've actually heard this from some friends of like, for black men, where they don't really have trouble in like the dating sphere, but they kind of feel like the people are sort of like fetishizing them. They're sort of like, if it's like it's sort of like the white girl, like, ooh, I'm like sleeping with a black guy to piss off my parents, and like shit like that, like, and that shit's fucked up. So even though you're seen as desirable, it's not for a good reason. It's like you're hypersexualized, and it can be, there's a lot, there's a lot of different variables. This is actually why like a lot of people ask me like, hey, how come black people get their own dating site, and you said that white people meet with racists, and it's like, well, because you have to understand that it's not just, unless you understand like the actual nuances and like the actual difficulties within communities, like through like an intersectional lens, you won't, of course it doesn't make sense, because you don't understand the nuances to the conversation. Same thing with Asian men. Asian men are like put at a massive disadvantage just because the perception of Asian men is sort of like weak or sort of like docile. Or if you're an Asian man and you sort of have to be like very traditionally handsome, far more so than I would say, a white man or a black man or whatever. So yeah, but I don't think it's the answer isn't to just try to cover all the bases yourself. It's to cover the bases you can cover, and then have other people come in and cover the bases they can cover. Like I said in the video, I'm someone who went down the red pill path, and I know those stops. I know the pitfalls. I know the bad turns, so I can tell people, hey, here's my experiences. Well, Lamar Joe, that's not really good either, though. There's whole communities in the red pill divided by race. That's not really good either, because then that's sort of the issue, is that then the certain communities are only talking about one thing, whereas, for example, MensLib, it's like, hey, we're talking about like general men's issues, but then also we have perspectives from the black community, from the Asian community, from the gay community, to kind of give a larger picture in the same place. That is the key. It's not just that you want to go out and look at different channels, different perspectives. It's that you want to, because what'll end up happening is like you'll kind of get stuck into one, and then it'll sort of like it almost like revert to tribalism, like, because you're in this one perspective, but you're not in the other. Oh, what's up, Knives? Whereas something like what I like to see, like from like either MensLib or my channel, it's, can we take all those different perspectives and bring them under one roof? And so it gives people a very rounded view of these issues. Because otherwise, then you risk the people just kind of get like tunnel vision into like one community. That only gives them one piece of the puzzle that pertains personally to them. But we want to have it so like, hey, so for example, when we're talking about like men's issues, like, hey, of course, like we want to talk about, men's issues in general, but then we want to talk about heterosexual dating, about homosexual dating, how about applying, the racial lenses to dating, or like how dating operates as a trans man. And while you think these things don't pertain to you, it's like, oh, well, I'm not trans, I'm not black, I'm not. It's still giving you a rounded sense of masculinity, what other men go through, and it just sort of like broadens your horizons in general. And then it sort of like makes you reflect on. So, for example, like, learning about how trans men feel. I think even if you're a cisgendered man, reading up on how trans men sort of like, their experiences in the world, and like their sort of like them trying to find their identity as a man, I think that is very useful for even if you're cis, because it kind of makes you sort of like it sort of makes you, what's the word I'm looking for? It makes you self-reflective on your own perception as a man. So like, okay, so when we see like trans men, in the world, in the dating sphere, it makes even cis men, it makes you sort of like reflect. Okay, what exactly does it mean to be a man in this sense? There are many people who perceive gay men to be who perceived gay men to be, or even bisexual men to be, less masculine because of, for whatever reason. It doesn't really make any sense, but it just kind of that's just sort of like a custom that we sort of like, that exists in our society. Oh, gay men are less masculine. They're not as manly. But then if you actually like, hear gay men's experiences and actually like talk to gay men, you start to realize, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Why is being gay make you less masculine? And it starts to make you, learning about the experiences of other men, can also give you a wider lens, but it can also actually make you self-reflect about your own issues or your own struggles. Well, that's a good point, Lux. It's trans people, I think, that's the thing. It's like, oh, it's a trans issue. It's like, well, no. If you actually think about it, if you have a trans man, that person has the experience of living as both a woman and a man, or being perceived as such. And so that is hey, so how, like, let's discuss this. How are you treated differently before and after you came out or your transition? And that can actually give a lot of perspective on how do we perceive masculinity, femininity, and how are the perceived genders treated differently. However, if we just like, hey, we don't even want to talk about trans issues at all because we're not. I'm a cisgendered, so why am I listening to trans issues? You're missing a huge piece of that puzzle. Not even just to their struggles, but how their struggles can reflect onto your struggles, your individual struggles, and it can kind of put different things in perspective. Yeah. So I think that's the answer. It's not to try to do it all yourself. It's to take a bunch of different perspectives, but try to put them all under one roof. And I think like a subreddit is a good place to do that, because you have sort of like this, what's what I'm looking for? This sort of like this mother base, in a sense, like MGS5, like you have like sort of like this mother base, like the mothership, and then within it you have all these different perspectives. I think that's the key. It's not to become too specific, not to become too generic. It's to give a lot of specific examples under the same roof. Let's see. Okay, hey Mac Matthew here. I gotta do it to you. 1 horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? All right, let me think about this. 1 horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized the duck. Ducks are actually like very aggressive. I used to like, back in my hometown, we used to like, there was like, where I used to run cross country, there was like a lake, and of course there was ducks and shit, and geese and shit, and like they were like fucking, like we would just like be running, and those motherfuckers were like scary. So I'm trying to think of like even if it's just like one of them, like holy shit, man. Like yeah, the horses would just get stomped, man, by like those flippers and shit. Yeah. So yeah, the horse-sized duck, absolutely. What do you feel? Oh, am I scrolling down? I want to make sure I'm doing that. Actually, let me try to zoom in a bit more. Does that work? I just want to make sure it works. Let me scoot this over. There we go. What do you feel is missing from men's issues discussions? Are there any issues you'd like to see talked about more often? I mean, I've kind of gone over it, but like, I feel like in terms of like men's spaces, absolutely, like in the broader context, maybe. But I think the one, and it's kind of redundant because that's why I made the video on it. But I think it sort of is like men's dating struggles. What ends up happening is I kind of had a falling out with a friend of mine in the Discord before the video came out because we were talking about, I actually argued that, like, you know, I don't think that a lot of current feminist rhetoric was equipped to help men when it came to dating struggles. And, you know, my friend, that she kind of took it the wrong way. It was kind of like a whole thing. But basically, the point I was making wasn't that, like, feminism is, like, bad, or, like, that it's not like men can't do to feminism. It's that the issue I had with a lot of rhetoric surrounding dating advice was that, so let's say I used this metaphor. Let's say I go to the doctor. I'm like, hey, doctor, I'm really anxious. I'm like super anxious. I'm shaking all the time. I'm scared. I can't do anything. I can't go to work. I'm a mess. I need something to help me. And then you go in and the doctor's like, and the doctor just starts explaining to you, like, well, anxiety is caused by this, and this is why, and he kind of gives you the whole rundown of, like, why you're feeling the way you do. Like, hey, this is what's causing your anxiety. This is what anxiety is. This is how it works. And, like, that's great, and that can add to the perspective. But then the guy's gonna be like, okay, I understand why I feel this way, but how do I stop feeling this way? Like, you need to give me something now. I'm in turmoil now. I need something. And this was sort of like what the dating thing was. Is whenever I hear people talk about dating issues, especially like men's dating struggles, I usually hear them talked about more in terms of theory, or like terms of like larger cultural social issues. It's like, hey, we have a lot of men who were really having trouble, you know, like asking women out, or like lacking confidence to, like, you know, approach women. And then the conversations they usually go into, it's like, well, the reason that is because, you know, it's the changing world, and men are expected to make the first move. And it's like, okay, that is important. Yes. Like, it's important to understand, like, why this is a problem, like what caused this problem, but how do we address the problem? You know, it's almost like with a lot of feminist rhetoric, I almost sometimes feel like it's like, I actually think I mentioned this in the video, if you go to someone in turmoil and just give them solutions that are like massive cultural and social upheavals, that doesn't help them in the interim. You know, that can be like a good end goal, but like what are the steps? What are the smaller steps we can take? And I usually don't see that when it comes to men struggled with dating. I usually see broader discussions about like cultural factors as to why men are struggling in the dating realm, but I rarely see sort of practical advice for these men in the meantime. How do we can like work to like break down like the stigma against like women not approaching men, or men always having to be the ones who approach women. Okay, we can break that stigma. We can try to do that, but how are we going to help men now? What are some tips we can give to men that makes it easier for them to approach women so they're not in such distress? That's sort of like what's missing, is the more practical advice, which is sort of why I made the male dating video. And that's sort of why I think it got such a good response, was because even on either end of the sphere, even in men's circles, outside of like pickup artistry and like red pill shit like that, especially mainly pickup artistry, this is missing from the conversation. What are the more practical steps? What are the more, it's not just about like saying, it's like, hey, when it comes to like, you know, sex, always get consent. It's like, you can say that, but like, okay, what are actual things we can do to improve this so consent is more, it's seen as less, you know, mood killer, you know, that people always say that. And like one of the tips I gave was, instead of, you know, hey, do you want to have sex? Because that can kind of be a loaded term that can sort of like add some auxiliary pressure. But that doesn't mean you have to just like stop everything and be like, hey, just want to make sure that like let's discuss consent for an hour and a half before we fuck. Like that's sort of impractical in many cases. However, you can implement it in very simple ways. Something like, hey, how far do you want to go tonight? So it's basically doing like, hey, you know, I'm interested. I want I want to like do stuff now. However, I am also respectful of like your boundaries. So you're basically doing that in a very practical way. You're discussing in championing consent and respecting boundaries in a practical way, not just talking about it and having like philosophical discussions. You're actually implementing it in a practical way. That is sort of what I think is missing in a lot of the dating realm. And yeah, so hopefully, again, I think that's why the video got such a good response from people, is because they realize like, wow, this actually is missing, and that's why guys get brought into red pill, into like, you know, pickup artistry shit. And if we can start to implement that, I think we'll start to see a lot of guys pull away from that shit. And it's already happening, I think. I think a lot of pickup artist crap is fading away. It's still there, but like not really as much. I think people are starting to realize that like, hey, we can have these discussions outside of like this context, outside of these circles. I saw your video on pickup artists and struggles men have when dating. How do you think things have gotten better or worse since then, especially in the pandemic? Well, with the pandemic, obviously, it's just harder. I mean, it's just, you can't, I mean, obviously, you're not going out to places, you're not really random. So sort of like the thing I said in the video is like, hey, a great way to sort of like break down social anxiety or approach anxiety is to, you know, just start like random conversations. Like, just like, again, like not like with women you actually like want to like have sex with or like want to date or attracted to, just anyone. That's just sort of how it works. Just get more comfortable having social interactions. And of course, the pandemic kind of fucked that over for a lot of people. Right now, things are opening back up. So again, it's changing. It's made it harder, obviously, but I don't really think in a sense of once it passes, I think we should be back to normal. I don't think there's going to be any super I don't think there's going to be any like super long lasting effects, as opposed to something like the Me Too movement. I think that has actually, a lot of people talk about that. It's like, oh, has Me Too changed how like men and women interact? In a way, it has. Whether that's good or bad, that kind of depends. It doesn't really, don't think of it as like, was Me Too good or was Me Too bad? It's like, just kind of consider it. How did Me Too, like the Me Too campaign, how did it sort of influence, you know, social interaction between men and women in like the workplace, or really any place. Yeah, it's, again, try not to think of it as like, oh, was it good or bad? It's like, how did it act? What were the effects? Like, in sort of like a cultural sociology perspective, just sort of like try to recognize, because a lot of people will like say stuff like, I'll always hear people say like, oh, Me Too was the worst thing that happened because it fucked up relations between men and women. It's like, no, it didn't. It did have an effect, absolutely, and there are pros and cons to that. But again, this is how society changes. There are always going to be growing pains when we're changing things. The question is like, okay, now once we've recognized how things have changed, how do we react to it? Don't just give up and just, hey, we want to go back to how things used to be. No, we have to find a way forward. We can't go back. We can't find a way. You're never going to make progress by going back, right? Very rarely. Like, certain things change. Like, a great example is a lot of the red pill dudes, like, they literally like sound like they want to like revert things back to like pre-sexual revolution. Now, I think I even answered someone on one of the comments when they were like, was the sexual revolution good or bad? It's like, what do you mean good and bad? It was inevitable. It was a necessary cultural change. It was going to happen eventually. The question, and so then people ask, well, was it good or was it bad? And when people say, was it bad, people mean like, hey, should we go back to how it was before? And it's like, there is no going back. Like, it's happened. It's over. Whether you are for it or against it, it doesn't matter. We just have to recognize how it has changed the landscape of dating and men and female relations, and move forward and find solutions. You can't just say, oh, it would have been better if we could go back to how things were. well, we can't. It's done. It's over. You've ripped the Band-Aid off. The flood is broken. Like, it's over. There's no going back. So we have to find a way forward. Yeah. But yeah, in terms of the pandemic, I don't think it's going to have that much of an effect. It's having an effect in the interim, but I don't think the pandemic's going to have a long-lasting effect as if something like Me Too did. Hey, Mac, I really liked your video on dating. Hope that you keep the good content. How do you balance the good things about traditional masculinity, like bravery, coolness, strength, without going full gung-ho with trying to be a man and constantly striving for this idea, being stoic, arrogant, and provide? We kind of already went over it. Local willingness, sort of like, or I kind of touched on it. It's try not to define what it means to be a man based on certain behaviors, but certain principles. So, for example, if you want to be a man, you have to be strong, right? But if I were to define what does strong mean in terms of behavior, well, most people would say, oh, it means you can't cry. Oh, it means you have to, be able to lift a lot of weight. Oh, it means you have to be able to, bench press X amount, whatever. Because you're specifying what it means to be a man via behaviors, and that's usually not good. It's try to find the underlying principle. So when we say, hey, to be a man, you need to be strong, you can add that to, and then you can apply that to any context. So when it comes to, hey, if you're in a really bad place, if you're, very depressed or anxious, asking for help from like a professional or a therapist, that is strength. That shows strength. Whereas other people would say, no, that's weakness. You need to just suck up and do it on your own. And it's like, no. Another good point was like the Harry Styles thing. Oh, to be man, you have to be masculine. To be masculine, you have to, men wear suits and men don't wear dresses. It's like, well, no, I wouldn't frame it like that. I wouldn't frame it in certain behaviors, like men wear this or women wear this. It's to be a man, you need to be a true man does what they want, does whatever they want, regardless of what other people think who are like looking at them and with like a judging intent. Obviously, you don't want to be someone who's just a complete asshole, doesn't care what anyone thinks. But like, yeah, if I'm to be like, hey, I want to wear a dress. I don't care what you think. I'm gonna wear a dress because it's what I want to do. Like that's masculinity. It's doing what you want and what's good for you, regardless of what others think. It's not men have to wear suits because that's what men do. Like that's stupid. It's the underlying principle. And that principle it will differ depending on the context, whether it's clothing, behavior, job in the home, whatever, child rearing, whatever. I think it's really about focusing on the principles of masculinity, not specific behaviors related to masculinity. That's the death rattle in a sense. That's the killing blow, is when you focus on like very specific behaviors. This is what masculinity is, instead of like going down to the bedrock. Okay, here are the underlying principles, and let's see how we can sort of like reframe them in our society. To be a man, you have to be a provider. That doesn't mean you have to make six figures and pay for and be the sole breadwinner, being the sole breadwinner of your family. It just means, hey, make sure your stupid kid doesn't, fall into the pool or, get his stupid ass into the utility closet. Yeah. So I think that's kind of, it's again, the principle is not the behaviors. What do you think of the idea of ditching gendered ideals like masculinity and femininity entirely, as opposed to reworking them into more productive ideals suited to modern social values? I don't, as much as I would, like I kind of said in the video, as much as I would love to see a day where masculinity and femininity were just like completely erased, and like no one had any gender expectations whatsoever or any gender roles whatsoever, I think that's a bit overly idealistic in the terms of like that's not going to happen anytime soon. Really? Oh, hang on, I just want to Lux. But to say to be a man you have to provide, doesn't that imply women can't provide? No, not at all, because you're under the assumption that men and women are somehow opposites, which they aren't. They're complementary. Masculinity and femininity are not opposites. They are two different. They're basically two sides of the same coin. You just use masculinity and femininity depending if you're talking to men or women. They're templates, right? You're just specifying them to men or women. This is why a lot of masculine and feminine traits aren't opposites. Hey, masculinity is to be. Oh, if men are strong, does that mean women are weak? Well, no, that doesn't make any sense. Like think of like providing and nurturing. Again, that's like masculine and feminine, but like they aren't opposites. Provider and nurture they kind of mean the same thing. Kind of. I understand there are like smaller specifics, but in general, you need to be a provider, you need to be a nurturer. The common thread is, and this is the principle I was talking about, you need to take care of those you love. So if a woman provides, she's being masculine. Well, no, she's being a woman. It just may not be used on the certain language that you're using. Because again, a woman provides by staying home and like watching the kids, right? That she's still providing. She's nurturing, I guess, but she's also providing, right? So the idea is eventually, once we start taking down the specific behaviors, like getting rid of like the very specific behaviors and bring them down to the principles, eventually, masculinity and femininity, there will be no difference between them, basically, because you're operating under the same principles, the same underlying principles of it, which is just not nurture your children, not provide for your family. It's just take care of the people you love. And that's not gendered. That's something that I think men and women should do. It doesn't matter how you do that, whether that means you stay home and watch the kids or you go to work. Yeah, it's just, again, it's like, it's hard because we're so like programmed into it, and it's going to take a while to like kind of like break that habit of thinking men and women are like opposites. But they really aren't. They're just they're two sides of the same coin in a sense. I wouldn't even say they're complementary in a sense. I don't even know if I would use that word. They are two different templates depending on what the problem with so I think we can work towards a non-gendered world by just providing a trait's a good person. Here's the problem with that, and this is kind of goes to this question about ditching gendered ideals in general. I would love if that was the case. However, there are always going to be people out there in certain institutions that are going to try to push back against us, right? So if we don't so let's say a young boy is growing up, and the world is telling him like, hey, be a man, be a man, be a man, be a man. And then like, let's say I'm his dad and I tell him, look, you don't have to fit, you can do whatever you want. And you can just be, who you are and just do whatever you want. My fear is that kid will still grow up and he'll still feel auxiliary pressure to feel, I still don't feel like a man. Society tells me I need to feel like a man. What does that mean? And so you kind of have to until we get to that point where like gender roles are completely gone. I don't know how, again, I don't know if that is a possibility. We can definitely improve it. Absolutely. It's ridiculous now. We can make it a lot. Doesn't this invalidate trans people? No, why? So when you give that boy a sort of like a template for masculinity, you can just give them traits that make them a good person, and then so that way you can make the person that way you can make the boy. I don't know, personally, as a guy, I don't feel a need to be a man. Well, that's great. And that's what we should strive for, but that is just not the reality for like basically a large portion of our population, where you have guys who are doing fine, but they're just so insecure because again, they've grown up in a world where these gender rules are the norm, right? And so, but we can't just rip the Band-Aid off. We can't just say, hey, just forget about gender roles altogether, because they're still going to go out into a world where those gender roles exist. So in order to, and unless we get everyone on the same page and stop, it's just not going to happen. again, or anytime soon. We have to kind of take practical steps forward. That sort of thing. It's not about it's not about that I don't think getting rid of gender roles is or trying to get rid of them as much as possible. That's a better way to put it. To minimize gender roles as much as possible, I think that would be good. The question is, what are the practical steps to get there? How do we take baby steps towards that goal? We can't just wake up tomorrow and it's like, you know what, gender roles don't matter. Everyone forget everything that you have, have internalized for the last decade, 5 decades of your life. Little boys don't even, in terms of the media, things have told you, just forget about it. Well, they can't because they've grown up in this world. So we need to find ways to sort of, it's like almost like we have to find ways to transition in a sense. There have to be smaller stepping stones so we can transition to that larger goal. We can sit here all day and say, hey, we should get rid of gender roles. Great. What are the smaller steps we can take? What can people do tomorrow that will that will get us closer to doing so? We can't just, if we just say get rid of gender roles, okay, but how do we do that? It's the same thing with dating. Or it's hey, how do I talk to girls? Just be confident. Okay, what are the steps for me to be more confident? That's sort of the problem. Yeah, that's sort of the issue. It's not the end goal that's the problem. We need to find smaller steps to reach that end goal. We can't just try to leap for the end goal because that's where we're always going to come up short. We need to find smaller stepping stones in a sense. First of all, thank you for your video on dating. Effective Fox, thank you. You said a lot of things I've had trouble articulating, both pickup art content and progressive criticisms of it. I hope your channel continues to grow and keep me on male shoes. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you. Can I ask your perspective on the whole male sexlessness epidemic? It's a stat that gets posted to Reddit a lot about how a third of men report not having sex in the last year, compared to 9% 10 years ago. I always heard different theories about why this is and whether or not this is inherently a problem at all for society. I was wondering if you had any opinion on why men are dating having sex less, or even if you think it's worth talking about. I think it really depends. In order to, the problem, I always go over this, statistics are, and this is why a big problem I have in a lot of red pill, even in law circles, people will throw out statistics that only form a narrative because of one's preconceived biases, right? So, for example, the one I always use is 1350. If I were to tell a racist, hey, 50%, did you know that black people only make up 13% of the population and they commit 50% of the murder? Well, that stat alone doesn't really give you a narrative, right? It's just a single stat. However, if I were to tell that to a racist or a KKK member, they'll fill in the blanks. They'll create the narrative on their own, right? So what they'll do in their head is oh, well, black people are not as, or more animalistic and not as civilized as white people. So that must be because black people, the reason they commit more murder is because they're less civilized than white people, biologically. That's what the racist would say. Someone who doesn't have that will say, it's not, it's not really confirmation bias. It's sort of like when people automatically extrapolate data based on their own biases. So, for example, a great example is when people say, a lot of red pill dudes will say, 80% of women initiate divorces. It's okay. To them, what the narrative is well, obviously these women are just not happy with their husbands because they have such high expectations. Well, that's because they're coming at it from a perspective of women are entitled bitches in a sense. And so of course that makes sense to them. However, if I were to look at that, I would say, okay, we see that women are initiating divorces, but why is that the case? Why? Let's actually dig deeper and compare it to different statistics. In this case, the statistic that a third of men haven't had sex in a year, what I would do is I would break it down. It's a lot of people would say, oh, this must mean that there's something wrong in the dating world. Not necessarily. What it means is that or it could just mean that a lot of men are just like, you know what, just sex isn't that important to me. You know, there are a lot of men who feel like they need to have sex to be considered a man, or like they need to be in a relationship because that's what society wants them to. But there are plenty of men who are just like, you know what, sex doesn't interest me. Relationships don't interest me. I just kind of want to do my own thing. I don't really have an interest in having like, you know, casual sex or you know, entering a relationship. So it could be, however, then there are men who haven't had sex, and this is like kind of where we get to incels. There are men who want to have sex, who want to form relationships, but are struggling with things that prevent them from doing so. So what I would look at, we would need to break this statistic down more, right? We would need to look at it and say, okay, a third of men have not had sex in the last year. How many of those men, then I would break down, how many of those men did so by choice? How many of those men just didn't have sex because they just didn't want to, because they just didn't feel like it, because they just, yeah, World War, I think we talked about this in chat. It's like you mentioned, like, it's not that like I haven't had sex because like I don't, or like been in a relationship because I'm not able to. I'm kept from doing so. It's just that I'm busy with other shit. I want to focus on art. I want to, you know, hang with my friends. I want to play video games. I want to, you know, start a business, whatever. It's this idea. It's like this idea of, and it kind of goes back to this idea of all these men aren't having sex. What's wrong with them? Well, nothing. There are some men who just don't have an interest in sex. There's nothing wrong with them. They just don't want to. But because we have this idea of, oh, men always want to have sex. Men always are sex hungry, right? They constantly want to have sex. So if they're not having sex, that means there's something wrong. Like, well, no, not necessarily. However, so what I would say is like the third of men report not having sex in the last year. What I would ask is, how many of those men wanted to have sex but weren't able to? That's the real number we have to look at. Because in that case, that's the problem we need to. Those are the people we need to, like. If there are just guys who are not having sex because they don't want to, well, hey, good for you, man. You're good, whatever. And we can discuss like why that is the case. You know, why are a lot of people not having children anymore? There are some people who aren't having children because of, there are a lot of people who aren't having children today because financially they can't do it. You know, they're like, you know, bringing a kid into a world when you can't even afford, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, that's just unfeasible. So that's part of the reason why some people aren't having kids. However, then there are some people who just aren't having kids because that's just not what they want. They're just like, yeah, actually, you know what? I just don't know if I want kids in my life. And that's totally fine. However, but these are two completely different things. We're kind of lumping them together. So in this case, we're lumping two different things together with this statistic. Men who are just deciding, actually, you know what? I just don't really want to have sex. It's like I can have sex if I want to. I probably could go get a date and get laid. I just don't want to. I'm busy with other things. It's not really that big of a deal for me. And in that case, we can discuss that. But that's one thing to discuss. The other side of the coin is, hey, I'm a man. I really, really, really want to get laid. I really want to be in a relationship, but I can't because of X whatever reasons. So we're actually talking about two different. It's two different discussions being lumped into the same category. I would be really interested in if they broke down, and let me know if they did. I would be really interested in seeing this statistic. A third of men report not having sex in the last year. I would like an additional statistic saying how many of those men did so by choice. How many men just didn't have sex because they just didn't put effort in, because it didn't really interest them. I would really be interested in to see that, because I'm kind of the same way. It's like, you know, like I'm, you know, me and my girlfriend, like, we've been dating for 3 years, and you know, it's funny because like you hear stuff like, oh yeah, me and my girlfriend, we fuck like 4 times a day. It's like, A, no you don't, but B, that just sounds exhausting. Like I like, don't you want to do other things with your girlfriend than just have sex? Like, that's a little weird. If the only thing you enjoy doing with your partner is fucking, that's probably not a good relationship. Probably not. Like, do you guys talk? Do you guys like watch movies? Do you like have discussions about stuff? Do you, I don't know, build Legos together? I don't know. Do you cook together? Yeah. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, it's like with like people not having as many kids. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be, because there are people who might want to have kids, but they can't due to like say fertility issues, or income, stuff like that. However, if there are people who just like, actually, you know what, I thought about it, I just don't want to have kids. I just want to be married, or I just want to be with my girlfriend and just live our life and get a dog and just live our lives like that. We don't have a desire to have kids. That's totally fine. And again, we can discuss why those cultural attitudes have changed, but they're not the same discussion. They're two completely different discussions. So, I remember reading on the X Red Pill subreddit that 50% of sexless men were because of not having their own place. I don't know if I really buy that. But if this is the reason why, aren't the stats the same for women? Well, no, not necessarily. Oh, that would only be the case if all men and all women were, all the people in these conversations were like constantly trying to have sex, right? Like it might be, again, it's like, I think it's like it's probably harder for the average man to get like just like a casual lay than the average woman. I would like defend. I would probably say that's true. But it doesn't really tell the whole story. Again, this is sort of the problem, is that people who think they're like scientists, like a lot of these like red pill idiots, they'll take statistics and extrapolate them into narratives based on their biases, when they don't understand that, like, as if you're an actual someone who actually like studies statistics and like sociology, you never do that. I think even Jordan Peterson said this. He's like, no sociologist worth their salt would create a narrative from a univariable analysis, right? You don't take one statistic, you take 50 statistics, you put them all together, step back, and it shows you the whole picture, and then you can start sort of figuring out what's going on. If you just look at one statistic, that doesn't really tell you anything. You can extrapolate a narrative from that. But that's usually based on your own preconceived biases. So again, the 1350 thing. Oh, if we just look at that, that must mean that blacks are more violent than whites, biologically, right? Well, no, because if I give you other statistics, such as implicit bias in the judicial system, income inequality, if I add 50 other stats to this, oh, okay, now this all sort of makes sense, right? But yeah, just taking a single stat always be wary of that. Depending, of course, it depends on the context. But if someone's ever making an argument just from a single data point, like a single statistic, be very wary of that. Always think to yourself, it's like, oh, hey, 80% of women are initiating divorces. That must mean it's because women are just unhappy with the men, and they just want to, because their feminism told them to be like entitled, and that's why. It's like, oh, well, actually, maybe there are like 10 other reasons why this might be the case. Don't just take one statistic and create a narrative from it. Always, if you ever see someone make an argument with just one statistic, that is a huge red flag, because usually they're just cherry picking statistics that form their argument. It's like when Ben Shapiro, like, facts don't care about your feelings. Oh, I'm just stating facts. However, depending on what facts you give me and what facts you omit, that can completely change the narrative, right? If I give you a bunch of crime stats for black people being way more violent than whites, you're like, oh, this must mean that. But then I don't give you all the statistics in terms of like racial, income inequality, implicit bias in the judicial system or the law enforcement. If I give you one set of facts but not the other, it doesn't give you the full narrative. It gives you a skewed narrative. So that's why, and that's how people can kind of get away with it. They're like, oh, I'm just giving you facts, but I am omitting certain facts that don't fit with the narrative I'm trying to create. Yeah, so that's basically it. Fed the Duel. The question: what question would you ask to a Jehovah's Witness to make evidence of the flaws of their doctrine? I mean, that would just be for a lot of religion. One of the biggest things I think is and this isn't just Jehovah's Witness, but in terms of like any religion, it's like it's stuff like if I were to like ask a Christian about like who doesn't like gay, who thinks homosexuality is a sin, well, God created gay people, so isn't it kind of weird? Why would you call it a sin if God created gay people, right? That seems kind of counterintuitive, right? Why would? Because it's unnatural. It's like, well, no, God, if you're a God created gay people, then how is it a sin, right? Now that doesn't apply to everything, of course, but yeah. That's a fantastic point, Jed. Listen up, everybody. If you didn't already know, and you should know because he is, if you didn't already know that Steven Crowder was like a colossal piece of shit, if you watch H. Bomber Guy's video on climate denial, basically what Crowder did was, hey, global warming isn't occurring. There is no global warming, and the ice caps aren't melting, because if you look at this statistic of like this Antarctic iceberg, it is actually grown. So see, global warming isn't happening, and that is true. That fact is true, that iceberg grew in size. And so people think, oh, how could there be global warming if that iceberg grew? Because it doesn't matter just about one iceberg, it matters about all the icebergs. And so you can't just go off of like, hey, this one iceberg got bigger. You have to say, okay, what about all of them? What is like you have to take them all, put them together, and it shows you that across the planet, the total amount of ice is melting. Not just like this one iceberg, all of the ice across the planet is melting. That is what that is like what an actual scientist would look at and actually do to determine what's going on. What Crowder did was he just wanted to find a statistic that fit his narrative, and then because the people who are like usually watching his channel are probably climate denials. So, oh, look, this statistic supports my view. But you're not trying to form your view based on statistics. You're trying to find statistics that support the view you've already made in your head. Don't ever do that. That is not intelligence. That's ideology. You're not a scientist. You're an ideologue. Okay. So I think we went through all the questions, but let me refresh the page because I think there have been more people who asked questions before. Here, right? That's 2 questions. Event, 2 questions. What do you feel about Mr. What do you think of the dishing? On gender as a whole. Matt cooked video. I think we may have gone through them all. Oh, here we go. So here's a couple new ones. Hi, Mac. I was wondering if I can get some advice for this anxiety that I have regarding dating. I always assume that if I made any advances or expressed interest, I will always come across as creepy. I just assume that the women I interact with are being nice and wouldn't be interested in me. Don't want to be a creep, ruin someone's day, or make them uncomfortable, so I simply just leave them alone so they can go on their day without me bothering them. I have read a lot of experiences as well as hear women in my life say that they will always receive unwanted attention when in public. I don't want to be a bother or ruin someone's day for expressing any interest in them. I would likely be an annoyance. So this is very difficult. It's extremely difficult because you're trying to find a middle ground between these two. Because you hear all the time of like women like, oh, this guy like started a conversation, like a lot of people like that kind of was like back in the Gillette commercial. There was like that scene where the dude's about to go hit on the girl and his friend stops him like, not cool, man. And it's like, Like he was just gonna go talk to a girl. Like, what's wrong with that? And the reason, and so like people say, it's like, okay, so when is it okay to approach women? Like, so like, well, whenever you want. You can approach a woman whenever you want in literally any situation. But the question is, when is it socially appropriate? How do you read? Is it going to make you look like creepy? Is it in a like obviously there are like certain. Hello. Hi. Want to come say hi? We got the lady in. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. How's it going?
Good. Which got a couple questions on. A couple new ones.
How many people ask questions?
A bunch of them.
Nice.
Gonna go through. You have fun?
Yeah, I was telling my family about what you're doing.
Oh yeah, because CJ popped up on the chat. Love you.
I'm leaving in like 15 minutes.
Wait. Oh, you going up to the suburbs?
No, me, Aaron, and Miranda are gonna get dinner.
Oh, I thought they were coming over here.
They were, and then they're like, we're hungry. So.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Sorry about that little segue. Sorry. I love her. So yeah, sorry. So disappointing salad. It is hard because the question isn't like, when is it okay to approach a woman? It's not that. It's how do I get the social calibration to know when it's appropriate to approach a woman? And the truth is, it's I can't explain that to you. The only way you can do it is to actually go out and again, that's how social calibration works. It's not like you read a book on it. And this is like why that doesn't work. It's you have to go and have conversations with like 50 people, and it'll just kind of come naturally to you. You'll become calibrated. That's what kind of sucks about it. So what I would suggest, disappointing salad, let's say you like go to a bar, or something I would suggest, if you have a friend who you think is very socially calibrated, someone who you think is very good in social situations, who can kind of read the room. If you're like, say, going out to a bar or a party, keep that friend close by and be like, hey, that girl over in the corner looks cute. What do you think it'd be okay to talk to them? And then maybe they can kind of give you guidance on that. No, look, she kind of looks a little bit like closed off, right? She doesn't look like if she's like on her computer, like really focused, if she's like looked around, if she's like just kind of sitting there looking around and she's like made eye contact with you, those are two completely different situations, right? However, the other thing that person can do, if like, let's say they go out, and this is actually why the pickup artist community, the community aspect of pickup was so effective, was because you had a third party who could kind of like gauge your social interactions. Because if you're a socially awkward guy, have you guys ever, like, I'm sure there are like a lot of guys out there who have had this happen. Have you ever had a situation where, like, let's say you're on a date and you think it went great, and then you hear from the girl and it's like, yeah, that was terrible. I was so uncomfortable the entire time. And you're like, what? How? I didn't see that. It's because you're not a third party observer, right? You're in the moment, right? So you sometimes need a third party to kind of observe, and then they can kind of step back and impartially see, oh yeah, did you not see how she was uncomfortable, or she was kind of being short with you, or she wasn't really comfortable, her body language. Sometimes if you're on a date with someone, these things, if you don't have a lot of social experience, sometimes you won't pick up on these things. But a third party, like I'm trying to think of a good, something that it was actually fun. I used to go out with a girl, and what we would do is we would go to bars, and we would just sit at the bar. This is what we did for our dates. We would go to the bar and just sit there, and we'd people watch because we would see other people's dates. And we could just tell, just from the body language or just from the interaction, how well the date was going. It again, and a lot of people, I'm sure you can relate to this. Like, have you ever seen a couple and you can just tell that they just don't think, or like they're like two people on a date. Well, Andrew, maybe she's trying to like give you it. Maybe she doesn't say like it's terrible, but maybe she's like trying like, actually it didn't really go well. It wasn't really. It was kind of awkward. So yeah, if you are say like, again, if you're like walking on the street and you see a couple at, let's say you're at a bar and you see a couple at the bar like on a date or something, you can usually gauge just from body language, just how they're interacting, how it's going, right? You can usually see, are these two people comfortable around each other? Are these people uncomfortable? Is it kind of awkward? You can kind of just get the vibe, right? However, if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of social calibration, it's going to be a lot harder for you to sort of like pick up on it intuitively. And it's going to make it even harder when you're in the moment. Because if you're like on a date with like a really cool girl, a really cute girl, you're probably excited. You're probably like on cloud nine. So you might not be able to see the situation objectively. Like, are you noticing her body language? On the other flip side, though, to your point, disappointing salad, sometimes guys who are really low in confidence will always perceive their actions as awkward. Like there are so many. It's like you ever like taken a test and you're like, oh, I did awful on that test, and then you get it back and you got like an A on it. It's because you're perceiving it through your mentality, right? So if you're on a date with a girl who you think is super out of your league and you think you're super awkward, everything you do is going to come off as awkward to you. It doesn't mean that she thinks it's awkward. She might find it endearing, or she might not even notice it. But in your perspective, it comes off as really bad. So that's why sometimes having a third-party observer to, again, like they even do this in like the pickup artists, like they'll in like the TV show, like on the VH1, they would like film the interaction, and then like mystery, like the pickup artist dude would be watching in like a control room with a TV, and he would say like, hey, did you see how she kind of like pulled away there? Did you see how she kind of touched her hand? Did you see how she kind of leaned in? Do you see, hey, she was showing interest. Hey, she looked like she was turned off and wasn't interested. See how her body was sort of turned away from you, or does it kind of look like she wanted to go? Maybe if you're nervous and talking to a girl, you might not notice that. But if I'm a third party watching, I will notice that. Especially if you're someone with a lot of social calibration. Yeah. So, so that's basically it. It's the two tips, or the tips I would give you, disappointing salad, are, if you can, try to go out with people. If you're like approaching women like at a bar or like a club or something, try to go out with people who you think are socially calibrated, who can kind of observe you and sort of give you tips after the fact. However, the only other thing I can tell you is just keep doing it, unfortunately. I know you don't want to be a creep, but like, so for example, like the example I gave of like, just asking a girl for a time, asking someone for like the time or like for directions, and then like saying cool shirt. Some guys will think they're being creepy, but like that doesn't mean the chick is going to perceive that. She just might think, oh, he just wants the time and wants directions. She can't read your mind and like know like why you're doing this, right? Are there going to be cases where, like, let's say you approach a girl and because like maybe you want to get her number and you make her feel uncomfortable? Yes. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's because you did something wrong. It doesn't mean you did something bad or because you crossed a line, right? It is not always a bad guy in these situations. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you're a creep. It just means that it just didn't, that person, just depending on the situation, it just wasn't received well. But again, that doesn't mean that you did something wrong, because if you approached the same way to a different woman on a different day, maybe even the same woman on a different day, you would have gotten better results. Maybe she was just in a bad mood. There are just things that there are just things that you can't control. So to your point, disappointing salad, I would the two tips: try to find friends who you think are very socially adept and kind of bring them out with you and have them kind of like almost like instant replay like your social interactions to see like, hey, did you see how you kind of came off? Did you see how you kind of came off a little awkward there? Did you see how she kind of pulled away? And just so they can kind of give a more objective, but also is to just try to make conversation as much as you can. Build up slowly. You know, don't just go up to a chick and be like, "What's up, babe? You want to get out of here? Let's hit it up." Like, no, you don't want to do that. Like, "What's up, babe?" Just like, "Hey, it's a really cool shirt," and make a small conversation. And you'll start to notice if, like, you know, if you're talking to a girl and she's like, "Oh, hey, what's up, man? Hi," and she's like kind of open, but then if she's kind of like, "Yeah, okay," and like, yeah, like kind of looking away or like, you'll start to realize that, oh, okay, I'm starting to like, I'm starting to differentiate when someone is interested in talking and when they're not interested in talking. And again, there aren't really ground rules for it. There are just things that come intuitively after you've gotten enough social experience. It sucks because it takes a long time, but that's unfortunately the way it goes. The Viet Kami. Hello, I'm a young new YouTuber who is currently editing a video and writing a script on my Far Cry 4 and the criticisms it receives on the internet. Do you mind if you can review my script and provide any criticisms? I mostly prefer ones in regard to the writing points I make. I also read again the core, by the way. I would Viet Kami. However, as a fellow YouTuber, what I would say is to just don't. You can have like maybe a friend look at it, but in order to improve as a YouTuber, I would say with the script, I would say put it out as is. You know, to trust yourself, because so what I mean by that is like, you know, with my like a great example is my Black Panther video. When I made that video, when I wrote that script, I thought it was like really strong. Now, like a couple years later, I look back at that script and I'm like, ooh, that wasn't, I didn't articulate this well. It's because I have improved, my rhetoric has improved, my scripting abilities have improved because I've gotten feedback from people where I went wrong. So I would suggest to you, Viet Kami, is to just keep the script as is, just make the video, just record the script, make the video, and put it up, and then get a response from people. I know that it's hard because like, oh, I want it to be really good, I want it to be perfect. You just kind of have to live with it. You just kind of, it maybe you'll make the video and they're like, oh, you kind of rambled a lot. Oh, you kind of like made a bunch of points. Oh, this point didn't make sense. And that sucks. However, you're going to be better for it. That because of that feedback from the people who watched the video, that's how you're going to get better at scripting. And then you're not going to and then on your next video, you're going to script better. And on the next video, you're going to script better you'll still make mistakes here and there. Like points don't really like come across as well as you would hope. But it's not really something I can do for you or anyone reading your script. It's just that you have to put it out there and then get feedback from your audience, not necessarily from like me or someone else or like one of your friends. Again, you can if you want, just to like make sure it makes sense in general. But at some point, you just have to like jump into the pool, put it out there, get a response, and see how that goes. But good luck, Viet Kami. Alan Christian, I tried to super chat you some money, but YouTube isn't letting me for some reason. I think I turned off monetization for this video. Yeah. It just kind of seemed like, sometimes I don't know what that means with monetization. Like sometimes it gets, you know what, because sometimes if shit gets like copyrighted, like YouTube, it sucks. Like if like there are some videos I've gotten where like I'll monetize them. And then, but then YouTube will copyright claim it and they'll put like 50 ads in like an hour video. I'm like, what are you doing? And that's sometimes it's not even because like I want to like make money on the video. It's because I don't want YouTube to put like 25 ads in like an hour long video because they're greedy pieces of shit. Yeah, so sorry about that, but thank you, Elaine. I appreciate that. I just wanted to say Mrs. Doubtfire, if you ignore the fact that he broke some laws, is a great father figure. Dude loved the fuck out of his kids. Watch it as an adult. That movie had layers to it. He would do anything for them. I felt that shit. Yeah, like Robin Williams and Mrs. Doubtfire, that was sort of like the whole flaw in the movie, where it was like, it felt like the wife in the movie was like really unreasonable. like, yes, Robin Williams' character, like Robin Williams in that movie, Mrs. Doubtfire, like he wasn't a good disciplinarian. Like he kind of like he kind of let his kids like run amok a lot. He wasn't like, he was more of like a kid in a sense than like he was like an adult. However, that doesn't make him a bad father. It makes he needs to improve his parenting skills, but he's not a bad father because he loved his children. And the thing is that he could improve on those skills. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I remember thinking Sally Field in that, the mother, I think she's like notoriously unreasonable, right? I feel like everyone agrees who watches the movie, like, wow, that mother's kind of a bitch. Like yes, it is. Yes, it's bad that like he wasn't a good disciplinarian. Like he let the kids like do what they want. That's not good, and they should have fixed that. But the way that she responded, didn't she like try to get like sole custody or something like that? He couldn't see the kids. Yeah, like something ridiculous like that. And it was like, what do you like? Why are you doing that? He loves the kids. Like, yeah, maybe the divorce was the correct option because you two aren't compatible anymore, and it's not good for the kids. But why are you trying to take away his rights to see the kids? I remember thinking, isn't that like the part of the movie where like everyone's like, what the fuck is wrong with the mom? And at the end, it's like not addressed. It's like, oh, it's like, I understand your perspective. It's like, no. Like, why are you trying to like take the guy's kids away from him like so they can never see him again? That's really fucked up. Well, hang on one second. Yeah. You kind of have to eat Chipotle fast or else it kind of gets like globby. Sorry, one second. Hey, mental health in men is one of the biggest struggles men face with society, mostly from stigma and toxic masculine traits of not showing the wrong types of emotion. Real quick, and because this always triggers the fuck out of me. Not you, sleeping baby animals. I know that like you understand it, but for other people, whenever someone says, "Oh, the term toxic masculinity means that like they're attacking masculinity," no, they aren't. Like, holy shit, it's implicit in the name. If I say something is toxic masculinity, I am making a difference between positive masculinity and toxic masculinity, right? That's like implicitly what the toxic part means. You're differentiating it from like non-toxic masculinity. So people who complain about toxic masculinity are just saying masculinity is bad. No, that literally, with like semantically, that makes no sense. Are there some people who just like don't like masculinity in general? Yeah, but those people are stupid too. Like just in general, like they don't like any sort of like masculine activities or like any sort of like template of masculinity. Yeah, I don't agree with those people. I think they're kind of dumb. But saying that people who like, if I say toxic masculinity and people get triggered and they're like, oh, you're saying men are bad, it's like you're a fucking idiot. That triggers the fuck out of me, because semantically, like the actual way that like phrase is like phrased semantically, that doesn't make any sense. It is like that is objectively wrong. Sorry. This can often start with young boys in the isolation and struggles this can cause, and many of them is often exploited by the alt-right manosphere to bring them in. Are there any preventive measures, spaces, or good resources you think could be beneficial to introduce or see more for younger boys, teenagers to stop these toxic spaces and indoctrinating them? Things in particular for online spaces where they are likely away from parents, peers, teachers, and become vulnerable. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do with like MensLib. There are a lot of other good subreddits, I believe, that I've seen. I'm sure that MensLib here on Reddit has like a list somewhere of that. I would like this channel to be one. Obese to Beast. He actually reviewed one of my videos, the male body video, and we actually had a nice conversation on Twitter. He's a big YouTuber. I think he has like 700,000 subs. But check out Obese to Beast. He talks about a lot of social issues in a very healthy, non-toxic way. He points out a lot of the bullshit, toxic masculine crap that really affects guys. That's a really good space. Yeah, the MensLib, my channel, Beast to Beast. He's really good. Yeah, it's hard because there are very few of them. There aren't many. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get more of them so we can prevent guys so they can get the same value without being sort of like without being saddled with all the toxic bullshit. Okay. How would you suggest asking a girl out online on a non-dating site? I do a board game meetup on Discord, voice only. Since it's the board game community, should I wait to play with a girl more than once? Do I DM them on Discord? Thanks, big fan. It's hard for me to tell. Like, so basically, like, there's a girl who's like in your board game meetup, and you want to ask her out. It's very hard because I don't know what the dynamic is. Like, if you two have had, I'd probably have to sit down with you and be like, have you two had playful teasing? Like, have you like actually talked individually, or was it just kind of in the group? Because you don't even know if you like her, and if you've only spoken to her like in a group setting, you don't really know if you like her in an individual setting, right? So I would try to say like you don't want to ask her out right away. You want to be like try to have a conversation with her separately, right? Try to have a one-on-one conversation with her separately, and then get the vibe. Is she asking you questions? Does this seem like you laughing a lot? Is it good? And see how you interact individually, not within a group setting, but individually. Well, like one-on-one, not individually. So again, yeah, it's hard for me to tell because I don't know the full context, but make sure that like you've actually had conversations, just you and her, and see what the vibe is there, not within the group, because people can be friendly. Within a group setting, people can be like friendly to each other, nice, and they can be good chemistry. One-on-one, it just and then it just disappears, right? However, if like, let's say you chat one-on-one a few times and things seem cool, don't even ask her out. Just say, hey, you seem really cool. I think I've told a couple of guys on my Discord, like when they're asking for a girl out, like if they're trying to ask a girl out, don't ask, suggest. So say something like, instead of saying like, hey, do you want to go out sometime? That's very open-ended. Because if she doesn't want to, there's not really many ways else besides her saying like, no, I'm not interested. Like that, if like, that's probably, if you're someone where that's okay, like you're going to be okay with that. Like it's not going to like crush your soul. That's fine. But you could, something like, so for example, it would be like, hey, you seem really cool. We should grab a coffee sometime. Don't ask, kind of suggest. Or like, we should grab a coffee sometime, and then they'll be like, yeah, that'd be awesome. And it's like, yeah. So basically you're asking them out without sort of making it like this, like the proposition, like, do you want to go out sometime? It's, again, use your best judgment. But if you're a bit self-conscious about like, hey, do you want to go on a date with me? Try something like, hey, you seem really cool. I'd love to, see if we click, we should grab a coffee or a drink sometime. It's a bit smoother in my opinion. It's a bit, and I think it projects a bit more confidence too. It's not like, hey, do you want to go out? It's more like, yeah, no, we should. I think there's chemistry here. It just shows a bit more confidence, self-assuredness, I think. It's subtle, but I think it's there. Hi, Mac. Before in the dating video, you talked about gender abolition and you seemed in favor of it. You later caveat this by saying it is untenable for various reasons, biology, culture. How do you think society can progress to the point where gender abolition is possible? Personally, I believe we will hit a technological point where we basically jump into transhumanism. Suddenly, at that point, gender and the roles are useless. Maybe. I just don't know when that point would be, Because again, consider that there are so many other people that are pushing back. Again, if we were all on the same side pushing against gender norms, that'd be great, but we're not. We're living in a world where there are a lot of people who are pushing against gender roles, and there are a lot of people pushing on the other side, right? So I think, like I said earlier, to kind of like reiterate, it's about finding practical steps forward, So even something as simple like when Harry Styles was like shit on by Candace Owens for wearing a dress. Oh, he's not masculine anymore. People came to his aid and was like, shut the fuck up, Candace Owens. Fuck off. Like, no one likes what you say. You're stupid. You're dumb. Everything you say that comes out of your mouth is fucking dumb. And I think that is a good start. It's just, and again, it's not like, we're not like reframing this, we're not like reframing gender roles or completely, or reframing men's fashion. We're just saying when we see like individual instances of like someone like, guys don't wear dresses. It's just someone who says, shut the fuck up. Shut up. Stop it. What do you mean? Who cares if they're wearing a dress? Shut up. Little things like that. And even though, again, even if you think it's something little, if everyone does those little things will all add up over time. How do you feel being the follow-up AMA to Heartthrob Justin Baldoni? Who the hell is that? Should I know who that is? Oh, he was in Jane the Virgin. Oh, I never watched it. I watched the pilot, and it was weird. And my girlfriend said, so she watched Jane the Virgin, and apparently they pulled like, so I'll be careful not to spoil anything. I mean, it's like an older show, so I feel like it's not a big deal. But like, apparently the show kills off a character, but the fans were like, bull, so they brought the character back. And like it made no sense. And the irony was that they brought the character back to try to like keep their audience, but bringing that character back destroyed the suspension of disbelief, and everyone just tuned out of the show. It was kind of unfortunate, and it really goes to show why you should have a plan when you're making shows and don't just wing it, you know? Like if you make a decision to kill a character off, stick with it. Make sure it makes sense. Don't just do it for shock value. But if you're going to do it, stick with it and commit. Don't like pussy out and like, oh, they returned from the dead. Like, no, stop it. Just kill them off. Because if you just revive characters, then it makes the stakes of the story, oh, a character died. Ah, well, maybe they'll get resurrected. I don't know. Sorry, one second. I haven't eaten a lot yet. Hey Mac, it's me, Jay Hemingway. Hey Jay. Hey Jay. So you might remember me tagging in some questions before. It's your main character for your story. Non-lethal, harmless. Nevertheless, he goes on a non-lethal, harmless prank-esque revenge quest against the people who wronged him years ago. His antics in the first half are successful with a level up feel to it. The antics in the second half are accomplished, but with mixed results. It's in the second half where his humanity, both direct and indirectly, slowly becomes a roadblock in his plans for more antics in the future. His humanity gets more tested when another character shows up with a grind axe against him, the antagonist. Unlike the main character, he wants to kill each and every one of them. However, by chance, it's the main character, due to his quick thinking and act for being the hero, follows every attempt. This is all purposely crafted because rather than go attrition roof of a person getting revenge and sending the menace, I wanted to preserve the main character as the babyface and him never becoming just as bad as the antagonist, if not worse. Also with the other person trying to get revenge with his antics, but he slowly starts to wonder whether revenge was worth it. Be it. Thoughts? Yeah, that sounds fine. I'm sorry, Jay. I don't know. That was a lot. Like I don't know the full context of it, so I really can't comment. But yeah, it makes sense. Dude is like pranking dudes to get revenge, and then a dude comes in who's like, yeah, no, let's kill him. And now the dude who is pranking the dude is like, actually, you know what? No, we can't do this. Yeah, I think that's right. Makes him look like a dick, but then it redeems him. Yeah, it works. Haxo, hi Mac. I think the reason incel community attracts so many men despite holding some ridiculous beliefs is that they are one of the only communities that acknowledge the importance of looks when it comes to male dating. That is absolutely false. I think when one says that, what they mean by looks, no one says that looks don't matter. Literally no one has, I don't think anyone has ever said that. I mean, maybe, like, there are probably idiots out there who have said that. But, like, if you ask anyone, hey, do looks matter in a relationship? If they say no, what they mean is, like, it's not the only thing. But, of course, if you're someone and, like, you, like, haven't cut your hair in, like, a year, your beard is, like, scraggly, and, like, your clothes are loose-fitting, of course that matters. Of course, if you're shorter, it's the problem with like a lot of incel communities is that like they say stupid shit like looks matter, because if your jawbone isn't like perfectly situated, you'll never find a mate. It's like it's too extreme in terms of looks don't matter, and it goes to full on black pill. It's not that they're like pretty much any dating site will tell you like, hey, get a haircut, get some nice fitting clothes. Like, are there certain cases where like there are just people who are just like objectively, I wouldn't say objectively, but like more aesthetic than others, like just like biologically or like bone structure? Yeah, but okay, what does harping on about that do? If you can't change it, then you just have to work with what you got. Most incel communities are just giant copes. They're just like, oh, I can improve. I can't get a girlfriend because I don't. My bone structure is wrong on my face. It's like that might be hurting you, but unless you've optimized everything else about your life, unless you've hit the gym, unless you've like gotten a haircut, unless you've worked on your social skills and your confidence building, unless you've like gotten a new wardrobe, unless you've put yourself out there and like tried to like project your hobbies onto like your surroundings and your community, unless you've done all that, then you can't really say that, right? Yeah, it's a good point, Mounty. The reason the incel community reaches disturbed men is because they frame themselves as a community that understands the struggles, but in the end only make their issues worse. Basically, it's like they offer that initial empathy, but instead of giving incels ways to like, hey, here's how you can improve your dating life, it's like, yeah, you're having trouble. It's because women are whores and because Chad's gonna fuck all the chicks, and you just there is no chance, and that's how you get black pill, and that's how you It's very toxic that they regurgitate the belief that an unattractive man cannot succeed and therefore cannot live a happy life. Yes. However, in most spaces, IRL and online, all these men hear is something like looks matter, which is true, but it can easily be interpreted as just world fallacy or dismissal of their problems. Yeah, absolutely, but like that's not really but that doesn't mean it justifies the incel movement. I think that like certain dating advice has to get better at that, where they have to be like, look, absolutely looks matter, and like if like or height matters. If you're a 5'5" guy, you're gonna have a lot harder time dating than a man who's 6'2". However, accept that, internalize it, and let's move forward. Don't just stick on that because if you can't change it. So what are you gonna do? You're just gonna sit here and cry and bitch and moan for the rest of your life. Oh, I'm 5'5", I can't get laid. Like there are plenty of dudes who are 5'5" that get laid. So you really have to. It's about moving past it. It's about accepting it. It's about recognizing it, accepting it, and moving past it. Incels never move past it. They just stay stuck. Oh, I can't get a girl because I'm short. It's like it doesn't. You are correct in that. That's why it attracts them. But they're giving you a terrible way to go about doing. They're not giving you a way to overcome it in a sense. Another thing they'll hear is focus on yourself arguments. In my opinion, it's very difficult to have high self-esteem as a man in today's society when attracting women is so heavily linked to being successful. Well, yeah, that's basically sort of like the vicious cycle in a sense. You need a job to get experience. You need experience to get a job. For a lot of men, hey, have confidence. Well, because they link their self-validation to their success with women, if they're not successful with women, they're not confident, and thus it makes it hard for them to be successful with women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's hard, but again, there's no real way out of that. You just kind of have to just keep grinding, unfortunately. You just have to ask out tons of chicks and like get shot down a lot and get rejected. But then eventually you'll find a girl who it works out. Like maybe not, it's not a girl who you're going to spend the rest of your life with, but like maybe a girl who just says yes to a date, right? Or just like you go on a date and you have a good time, or maybe you get a kiss at the end of the night or get laid or something. All it takes is one, and then it kind of breaks that seal of like, oh, look, there are a lot of, I'm not everyone's type, but I'm at least some people's type, I don't think many incels want a girlfriend for sex or even intimacy. They want respect and validation that comes from being able to attract women. Absolutely. This is 100% true. It's not about the actual sex. This is why people who say, "Oh, well, if we can use sex workers," that's not going to work, because then they'll just think, "Oh, I have to pay for sex. I'm a loser." They want to know that they want to know that they're desirable, in a sense, that they are that. It's not that they want to get laid. It's that they want to know that women want to sleep with them. It's like that they're they're sexually desirable. They're sexually desirable, in a sense. They want respect and validation that comes from by being able to. Yes, in my opinion, a lot of misogyny and radicalization in male spaces can be prevented by destigmatizing sexually unsuccessful men. Oh, absolutely. That's why we agree on that. That's why you don't make. This is why we should make fun of guys for being virgins or for having like, oh, hey, limp dick or shit like that. Or like I even said, like Trump tiny hands jokes. Like that's not even sometimes even like I see like lefties do this. Like, oh, you're just a virgin incel loser who can't get laid. Doing that as an insult isn't good because it actually only perpetuates the problem. You're perpetuating the problem you're critiquing against. For example, I see a lot of left-leaning people use incel as a go-to. Yeah, exactly. I think it sends the wrong message, and these radicalized men, it will only reinforce the idea women and people in general dislikes them only for their failures when it comes to dating and not their misogynistic beliefs. Yeah, of course. Virgin shaming is bad. Absolutely. Is it true a lot of men fail in dating due to their social skills, but some men are unsuccessful mostly because factors they cannot control? I believe there is not enough sympathy and too much ridicule for these men in society. What do you think? Absolutely, but that's kind of what we went over in the male dating video. The problem is that there are things that are out of your control, but the answer is that, okay, we understand these are out of your control. We recognize that this is true, and this makes it harder for you. However, you need to move past it. It's like, oh, I'm 5'5", and I'm kind of like chubby. Or I shouldn't say chubby because that can be. I'm 5'5". I can't. Girls like taller guys. So what I would say to that person is like, yes, you are 5'5". It's going to be harder because a lot of girls like taller guys. It is going to be harder. But we have to just move past it. You have to internalize that. You have to accept it. But now we have to move past it and just live with it. Like it sucks. You're gonna lose out on some dates and some girls because they just don't want to date a 5'5" guy. If you were 6'2", you like that girl would have been with you, but she's because you're shorter, she just didn't want to. That is true. It's going to be harder, but we have to move past it. The problem with incels, what they do is say, oh, I'm 5'5", girls don't like me. I'm just going to give up completely and not better myself and not get a haircut and not even try and just sit here on my ass and complain. And that's when you get blackpilled, and that's when incels, it starts to become a very scary place. Yeah. It's about recognizing the difficulties, understanding them, but then finding ways to address them and move past them, not to harp on them and just allow it to just like to not allow it to just result in you just giving up completely, right? Yeah, we agree on that. Okay, I think we did some more, so let's go through again. There might be some new ones. If I make social media, join this evening. Did that one. Bounce good things. First baby things, trouble. We already did that one. Did that one. May. Okay, I think there's a couple. I saw a couple new ones. Hi, Mac. I'm in love with my girlfriend, and as far as I can tell, she's in love with me too. We've been together for almost a year, but unfortunately, she has a lot of trauma from the past that has recently come up in therapy, and part of that has made her not really able to have sex anymore. And now we have gone from having sex almost every time we see each other, potentially several times, and not every single time, but like who cares? To now we haven't had sex or anything in over 2 months. I love her and want to do what I have to support her, but I'm beginning to wonder about asking about an open relationship or something. I don't want to have sex with anyone else, but I don't know what to do. She doesn't like it either, but every time we try, she locks up. She said she doesn't even understand, Like she'll get flashbacks to her childhood and trauma that has nothing to do with sex. She tells me she even wants to have sex sometimes, then we start making out and everything's fine, but when things start heading to the next step, she can't. I don't know what to do. Obviously, the answer is to just wait, right? Or should we consider an open relationship, but for sex only? I don't want to break up. Ugh, I'm so confused and sexually frustrated. Masturbation only worked for so long. So this is going to be a hard one because what the two answers you'll hear from one person say, oh, well, if you need sex in your relationship and she's not giving it to you, break up with her. Or the other side is like the people like make you feel guilty, like, oh, you sound so shallow because you just want sex, and you should just accept it and not, like, that's stupid too. The reality is like, yeah, if sex is important to you in this relationship and your girlfriend, if you aren't able to do it, of course you have to try everything you can, whether it's like sex therapists or therapy. I had a girlfriend one time who she was very nervous, she had a lot of anxiety before sex, so we would try things like, I think we tried like weed gummies one time, or just like, massaging, stuff like that. Like there are different ways that you can go about finding solutions for it. The part is you don't want to just give up, right? You want to still try to find solutions. Maybe a sex therapist, maybe therapy. However, if it gets to the point where like you've tried everything and it's still not working or it's too hard, if it's something that like the not having sex, again, there are some people who like feel like, oh, I don't have interest in having sex in my relationship. Does that mean there's something wrong? It's like, not necessarily. Different people have different sex drives. Different people value different things. I'm sort of in a place where I'm kind of like, yeah, sex is fun, but it's like, it's not something that I feel like compelled to do like every day, or like, it's just like, hey, treat it as like a fun activity that you do like you do anything else. Like, hey, we go to the movies too, but we don't do it every night. Or like, we don't go to the movies like 4 times a night. That'd be a little weird. So yeah, there's sort of like, I think because like there's like sort of like a social expectation wrapped up in having sex with like your significant other a certain amount of time or a certain often, right? It can be good and bad. It depends on the relationship. But if this is something that is causing you distress, like that, like not having sex you're not liking it, yeah, you should confront it. You should figure out things to try to make it work. But to your point about an open relationship, so my question would be, is it just the sex? Like, is it just sex in general, or is it sex with your girlfriend? Because those are two different things, right? Because if you just want to have sex, then like, yeah, an open relationship would work. But if it's that you want to have sex with the person you love, your girlfriend, to feel like more intimate and close, an open relationship isn't going to fix that, right? So yeah, I mean, if it's just sex, an open relationship might work. Obviously, you're going to have to see how you two feel about that. Because some people can handle it, some people can't. Open relationships or like poly relationships, it really depends on the person, their temperament, their values. However, even if you do have an open relationship, that might not work though, right? Because you might have it and you might you get the sex, but you're not getting the intimacy from your girlfriend, right? The sexual intimacy from the girlfriend that you love. So even if you did get an open relationship, even if you guys did decide to go forth on an open relationship, it might not even fix the issue. So yeah, but then if it gets to the point where like, look, it just isn't working, we can't do it, and that distress is outweighing the good, you have to make a choice. It's like, hey, can I be in this relationship without it, without having sex with my partner, or is it causing me too much distress? And if that's the case, then unfortunately splitting up may be the right move. The key is to not feel guilt. Like what happens is it kind of gets weird with sex, where people like, especially like I think men, they're like, oh well, if my girlfriend, if our sex life isn't good, or like I'm not sexually attracted, should I feel guilty should I feel guilty for breaking up with her, like, or for us, like, splitting up? It's like, no, because that sex is an important part in relationships. Not even in terms of just like the physical act, but just intimacy, sexual attraction, romantic feelings for one another. Maybe you're just better off as just friends. Close friends, obviously, but not romantic lovers in a sense. Yeah, it can, because again, you'll get people who are just like, oh man, if she's not fucking you 3 times a day, jump her. But then you'll get people who are like, oh my god, you're such an asshole, you're such a superficial sexual dick. Like, both of those people are idiots. Like, they don't really understand the complexities of relationships and how this works. But yeah, what I would suggest is try everything you can with each other. Try therapy, you can even try maybe certain substances, like, relaxation stuff. And then, but if that doesn't work, maybe try an open relationship. But if that doesn't work and it's causing you too much stress to not have sex, then you might just have to call it, unfortunately, break up. But don't quit. You don't have to make the decision right now. Like, try everything you can, work it out, do everything you can to try to make it work. And depending on where you end up, then you can make the decision. So good luck though. Don't feel guilty about it. This is how you fix this. You're both making the effort to make the relationship work, which means you care about each other, which means you're already in a good spot. But yeah, good luck. I'm rooting for you. Do you think it's feasible to date when I'm still living with my parents at 27? I had a lot of struggles in my 20s, but now completed a year of CS and I'm going for programming internships. Do you think it seems feasible once I get an internship? My looks and health seem to be vastly improving. Everything is starting to go pretty well, but it'll probably be a while before I can move out still. Yeah, why not? A lot of guys kind of do this too, where they kind of like get like, oh, if I'm living at home. Living with your parents, there are some girls who will just like see that you don't have your own place and like be like, blah. Yeah, there will be, but for other women, it depends, right? So for example, hey, this guy is living with his parents. Oh, he must be a loser who can't get a job. No, his mother had, like, maybe she had like a stroke or something, and he moved back in with her to, help out a little bit, right? So you really can't compare those two situations, because in one case, it's the fact the dude is living at home is because he can't hold a job, or he can't make enough money to like have a place of his own. So it might speak to his his maybe immaturity or his inability to take responsibility for himself. On the other hand, hey, you're helping your mother. You're not living with your parents just because you're irresponsible. You're doing it to help them. So it's different. Now it depends. Like, if you're trying to say, if the girl you end up seeing has her own place, you might just have to spend time at her place more often. Or maybe if you're living at home when your parents are out, it'll be a little bit harder, but I don't think it's unfeasible. If you both live at home with your parents, that might be a lot more difficult, obviously, because you just don't have like a private space of your own, especially at your age at 27. But yeah, I think you should just start. Just don't wait until now. Don't wait. Just stop. Don't wait for the right point. Oh, is it okay once I get an internship? Just do it now. Because you're gonna find women who aren't gonna be interested. Like, oh, he's living at home. I don't care why. But then you're gonna find women. It's like, oh yeah, you're living at home, but you're doing it because you're doing it because you're trying to get your shit together, so you're responsible, and you're gonna get your own place in a while. So it's not that big of a deal. And then there are some women who aren't gonna give a shit, because a lot of people live back with their parents, but it's not because they're like lazy. It's because like just the economy, and it could be for a number of reasons depending on your cultural values. So yeah, in your case, Wayward, I don't even wait. Just do it now. Just start dating now, and then you're gonna meet women who aren't interested because you're not in your own place, but you're gonna meet plenty of women who aren't gonna care or are not going to mind because they see you're not doing it for because they see you're doing it because you're responsible, and that's attractive. That you're like, hey, it'd be stupid of me to try to move out now when I'm like just getting back on my feet. So I'm gonna chill here for a bit, and then when I do move out, I'll be ready and good to go. So yeah, don't even wait. We're just start dating now, and then once you get your own place, it's not gonna matter anyway. But yeah, don't waste time stalling. It's just go for it. Let's see, were there any more? Okay, 2 questions. Max, anything? Discussions. More often, anything that she needs. Got that one. Yep. I'm gonna get advice, anxiety. Got that one. Yep. Go to super chat money. Yep. My health. Yep. My gender. Hey Mac. Some concern. I wonder how long the current problems. Okay, we got another one. Just another question, but one thing I often wonder about is how long have the current problems constant during dating been around for? Because memes like that face when no GM forever alone, for example, are 10 years old, but it seems like if you go back 10 or 20 more years, there doesn't seem to be anyone complaining, or at least we can't find them. Why do you think that's the case? Do you think people 20 years ago didn't face such issues? And if so, why, or do you think there's something else to it? I think the internet absolutely has changed this a lot, because the internet has sort of taken the actually Destiny put it really well a couple days ago. Social media was supposed to enhance our social interactions. What has happened is replaced them. So it's like, with Facebook, the whole point of when Facebook came out, the whole point was that, hey, look, you have photos and then you go out to parties and you meet people and then you can keep in touch with them so you can go out again. What's happening now is that people have just used Facebook as like their social life. They just use it for that is their it's not like an enhancement to their social life. It is their social life. Same with Instagram, same with Twitter, same with a bunch of stuff. It's like people, hey, why go out to a bar and talk about these issues with my friends when I can talk about them here on Twitter? But maybe you're at that bar and then like you see a cute girl and you go and talk to her and hey, what's up? So yeah, it's just that I think that in general, due to social media and like technology, our world is getting more isolated. It really isn't an issue of like, there are some issues related to like, changing gender dynamics and whatnot. But I think the main thing is just that due to social media and, the way that our world is getting more and more isolated, I just think it's just a matter of, just people just being more isolated in general. They're just being less, not necessarily less social, but being more like in person, less in person social. I don't know if I put that right. But yeah, it really isn't. I think that's the main thing. Again, there are some things related to gender roles. I think even like post Me Too, I think that did have an effect. Not really like a major one, but it did have an effect, I think. But the main thing is just that, again, Destiny put it really, really well. Social media was supposed to enhance our social interactions, but they're slowly replacing our social interactions. And that is the main reason why I think isolation is happening to the point. Also just things like lower wages and shit like that. That just doesn't help because you have less spending money. You're working too many hours. You don't have the energy or time or money to go out and do fun shit and meet new people. I think that may have been it. Yes. Okay. I think we answered them all. All right, cool. So yeah, I think we answered them all. What I'm probably gonna do is I thought it would be kind of weird if I like took time to type them in. I might go back and type these in. I'll probably take me. I have some time tomorrow. I'm gonna be around. I might actually answer these questions on Reddit. Or maybe I'll just link this. Maybe I'll link this Q&A or this AMA, like this video that I'm live streaming. And then what I'll do is I'll put timestamps. Like I'll put like I need my own names question on the timestamp. Maybe I'll do that. That might be easier. Because it's the same thing, right? I'll probably go back and like actually put in the answers and answer these like physically. But for now, I think this will work. Just the live stream. Is it a machine answering these questions? What? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. That was a blast. That was good. I like that. Yeah, I didn't know. Again, I've never done like an AMA, and then me and Mikhail were like, we can live stream it, and I was like so nervous. I was like, oh man. I got back home. I think it was like Thursday. I think me and him talked, and I'm like, me and my girlfriend were watching dodgeball, and I had to stop halfway through. I'm like, babe, I have to talk to Mikhail because I need to know how to do an AMA. And like we're on a call. We got a Discord call, and we're like, we're on the Discord call, and we're like, all right, so how do we do it? He's like, okay, so you make the post in the morning. I'm like, yeah, and then you just wait until like 6. It's like, yeah, and then you just answer the questions. I'm like, oh, my bad. And then like, oh, but what about the live stream? It's like, yeah, you can just live stream it on the channel. And it's like, oh wow, that was a lot more simple than I thought. And it took like 15 minutes, and I went back and watched the end of Dodgeball. Dodgeball is a really good movie, by the way. I know I use it for my 3-act structure like video. I have to get back on that. I have to make the next part of that, the end of the second act. But Dodgeball is actually like a quality movie. It's actually about something too, you know? Like it's about like learning to like take risks and actually like put yourself out there and like actually risk something for once in your life, not just like with Peter LaFleur. It's about like, hey, you know, you have two choices. You can either just like sit here and just be here and just be in this spot forever, or you can take a chance and maybe reach new heights. Yes, you could fail and you could get disappointed, but that's a part of life and you have to accept it. Yeah, Dodgeball's a fucking good movie, dude. It's so inspiring. Okay. Well, guys, we're all done. I think, let me just refresh one more time. Maybe there was like another question that came in. If there are any questions that come in, I can always. How worldwide is the incel movement modern day male dating struggles? It depends on the region, Pyro. It really depends because you know, I think a lot of Asian countries there are a lot of issues with you know, isolation. But again, that's more related that's less related to like men and women and more related to just like the isolating aspects of our entire society. And especially in a lot of Asian countries where it's a lot worse. Where people just I think there was like a Vice article about like Korean hermits where they're just people who just like literally don't leave their apartment. They just like they work from home, they get food delivered, and they just live in their apartment. Well, they live in their apartment, but like they stay in their apartment constantly. Like they hardly even go out and do stuff. Yeah, I again, I don't really think it's more of an issue of social interaction, like men dating interactions getting worse, like, you know, like red pill, like hypergamy. That's not really the main issue. The main issue, I think, is just like the less. Yeah, right at the end. I know. Destiny was like huge. I would love to talk to him. I don't know how to get a hold of him though. I also don't agree with him on a lot, so I don't think it would make for like a good talk. We would just like talk about shit we agree on. Neats? Oh, maybe that's it. Maybe it's it, Lux. Yeah, I forget. Hang on, let me look it up. Korean shut-ins? It was like shut-ins? Oh yeah, hikikomori. Also known as acute social withdrawal, is a total withdrawal from society and seeking extreme degrees of social isolation and confinement. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but again, I don't think that is a case of like the dating market becoming unfeasible for men or women's hypergamy excelling. It's just a matter of we are, you know, there are so many things in our life that are becoming automated or not really automated, but there are so many things that are becoming more instant gratification in terms of, you know, you can order food, you can write to your door. You can. I was telling my girlfriend the other day. I was like, it's not even that like you have to order food. It's that you can order food to have them drop it off at your door and then pick it up after they left. So you don't even have that social interaction of being like, hey, how are you? It's not even like you pay them, and at least back in the day. But like what I like back in my hometown, my mom would always like pay in cash. So the dude would bring the pizza, and then we'd still have it. It's a small interaction, but it's still, oh hey, how are you? Here's the money. Bye. And it's just a small interaction, but it's something. And sometimes that pizza guy would be the same one, and we'd be like, hey, we recognize you. So even though it's something small, at least it's something there. Nowadays, you have you pay online and you tip online, and then with COVID, it was drop off. So like sometimes I've gotten food delivered, and like they'll leave it at my door and ring the doorbell, and by the time I get down there, they're gone. And so there's no social interaction there. Again, even if it's something that small, of just a like, oh hey, thank you so much, have a good one. It's just that is at least something, right? That is at least some sort of social interaction. That are just kind of slowly being faded out by technology, by just certain aspects of our society. As far as talking to Destiny goes, I think you might have a more productive discussion with someone like Vosh. Yeah, I actually reached out to Vosh, and I was like, I really wanted to thank Vosh because him and Destiny especially were the two guys who really allowed me to, I've spoken a lot in this channel about like the responsibility that a creator has in terms of curtailing their audience, like not letting their audience get away from them, not just letting your community run rampant. And that I talked about that with Mikhail and Matt on our talk on the Q&A. You have to be proactive in sort of like stamping out, flare-ups in your community, whether it's like reactionaries or if like people are starting to take the wrong things from your videos, you don't want them to. You have to be proactive. Because again, eventually what's going to happen is you might start fostering an audience that you don't want to talk to, and it sucks. Or you might be pushing ideas that are like fortifying reactionaries or people that you don't agree with. That Last of Us 2 video, that easily could have been if I wasn't careful, that easily could have been a bunch of people talking about like, yeah, they put the trans kid in the game. It's the trans agenda. And all it takes is like a couple people to kind of like start that up, and then it attracts more people, and then all of a sudden I'm talking to a bunch of transphobes. And it's like, but yeah, every time I like saw a comment like that, I was like, hey, it's not what I mean. What the fuck are you talking about? And I would actually like try to stamp it out. So like when other people came in and saw that, they were like, oh, this creator doesn't like he's not on our side. And it's like, good, get the fuck out. I'll have a disagreement with people, but there are certain things where I'm just like, women are whores. I'm like, how am I supposed to like have a reasonable discussion like that? Like we can disagree on certain things, but if you're someone who just doesn't believe that like trans people are like valid, or like you think they're like mentally ill or something, then I'm like, what? I can't have a conversation with you because we're coming at this from two completely different wavelengths. Like we could have a discussion about certain trans issues or like how we should like handle certain things or maybe stuff like that. But if I'm talking to someone who thinks like black people are like biologically inferior to white people, I'm like, where is this discussion going? How is this going to be a productive discussion? Right? It's just going to be, we can debate certain issues in terms of like, in terms of whatever race issues, whatever sexuality. But if it's so severe where like our viewpoints are so incompatible, it's just like, just get out, because like, what are you doing here? Like there's no discussion we could have that would be productive that wouldn't end up in just us yelling at each other because our worldviews are so dissonant that this entire conversation is pointless. Yeah. But yeah, Vosh and Destiny really were the two guys who really helped me sort of solidify that for me. I took that to heart, and I'm really glad I did, because now I have a community with you guys where we don't all agree on everything, but I feel like we're on the same page in terms of like the major stuff, in terms of like just like general human decency, you know. I'm proud to say, like, I think we have an audience that is full of people who actually are capable of critical thought and just aren't people who are just like jumping on the bandwagon because like, oh, SJW suck. It's like, no, if we're like actually talking about like, I'm excited for the forced diversity video to come out because from a lot of the responses I got, there was so much, like when I asked people like, what is forced diversity to you in your head? I didn't just have idiots who were like, it's the corporations making white women have sex with black men on TV. And it's just like, and like, like 4chan reactionary idiots. It's, no, I got a lot of really nuanced answers of stuff like, it's like, hey, it's not necessarily the diversity. It's when like corporations use feign diversity and get people like, so for example, like, Star Wars, hey, we're going to have the first gay kiss. And like that was like big. That's big to a lot of, like gay kids. It's like, hey, I'm finally going to see representation. And then it's like a little kiss at the end that they can cut out for like foreign markets. It's like, don't do that. Because you're getting the clout of like sort of like, it's kind of like queer baiting. It's like, hey, look, we're going to have gay representation. And then you never follow through. That's bullshit. Or it's like, if you just like, hey, well, look, we put a black character in there. We didn't give them any characterization. They barely say any lines. They're just there because now we can say we had a black character. Yeah. So. Even if someone sees trans from mentally ill. Okay. Yeah. By der Modekutter. See, that's a person who, like, what are you? No, because that's just not what that is. Like, that's what I mean. It's like if people, oh my God. Like, that's what like really frustrates me about like a lot of like these people. It's like, hey, I'm free to have my opinion. It's like, yeah, but like there are some opinions that are still so fucking stupid. Like, it's like they're like, it's like, hey, let's have like an actual discussion about whether or not black people are biologically inferior to white people. No, because I'm not entertaining that conversation because there is no statistical evidence based on this. You can throw out a bunch of statistical evidence that you think proves it, but actually isn't, because if you actually put it up against other statistics that is actually a lot more reasonable and like sensical explanations to it. There are certain conversations you want to have, but there are other times when there are certain conversations you can't entertain, where it's just because like, hey, are trans people, they aren't valid, they're just mentally ill and we should put them in asylums. At that point, I'm just, what am I doing? Like, what are we doing? Like, what are we going to come, what is the middle ground going to be here, right? What is going to come out about this? All it's going to do is allow that person to just rant off a bunch of like objectively false information about trans people, and then you correct them, and then they ignore you because they're so stuck in their own ways, and then you've just wasted 2 hours of your life, and then you've allowed this person to spew all this bullshit on your channel. And so yeah, there are some cases where you just have to. Yeah, why don't you tolerate my intolerance? Basically, it's like there are some positions that are just, why are you afraid of being owned by my facts and logic? There are just some positions where it's just like, hey, should we discuss to see if maybe the Jews are actually like taking over America? No. What? No. Why would we have that discussion? Because then because by entertaining it, you're in a way validating it in a sense. Like, oh yeah, let's have a debate on this. It's like, there's nothing to debate. That's just false. And that's sort of like the danger. And people will try to guilt you into it by saying it's like, oh, you're just afraid you're not open for the marketplace of ideas. Like, pull like a Dave Rubin. But there are some ideas that are just like so stupid that by even interacting with them, you're in a sense validating them. And like, you want to be careful because even if that person comes off as like a raving lunatic, there might be people watching that see all the hatred and points they make, and it's having an effect on that person, and so you have to be careful. Here, let's see if I'll refresh one more time if there's no more questions. If not, I'll wrap up. Okay, yeah, so we're done. All right, everyone. Yeah, exactly. It's like debating with a flat earther. It's like, what are we doing? Like, it's just a waste of your time, or it's just like what, or it's like what people who like think like that. It's like or people who think vaccines cause autism. It's like, what is the end goal of this conversation? Because I can throw out all this evidence that disproves your position, and you'll just tell me that you don't believe all that evidence, and then we're just back to square one. The only difference is now I've wasted 2 hours of my life, and you spewed a bunch of stupid bullshit on my channel that I can't get rid of because now it's in like the chat log. Thank you so much. And so yeah, there are certain conversations that you just can't entertain. Like maybe in like a private setting, like if you can get them like into a DM, and if you think maybe you can get the person to like come around, and maybe, you know, I already did Pedro. It's already sorted by new. I'll make sure they're on the bottom. Yeah, it's already sorted by new. That's why I refreshed it. Yeah, they're just in some situations you just can't entertain. Otherwise, you're unintentionally validating it to some extent, and you just can't do that, especially if you have like a large platform with like a lot of people watching it. You just can't do that. You have to, and people will call you a coward. People will say like, oh, you're running away from an argument. But you have to measure what is the cost benefit ratio. If I entertain these ideas, even if I like make the person look like an idiot, am I still perhaps doing something bad to like the rest of the you know, like the discourse? Does this mean that people are going to start like unironically having these debates instead of just laughing them off? Yeah, so that's sort of why, and it's hard. It's hard to know when that is the case. But you just have to use your best judgment. But all right, guys, thank you so much for coming. Everyone who asked questions. Again, what I'll do is for those of you, if you're watching and you asked a question on the Reddit, I might go back and answer them maybe tomorrow. I think I have some time, or maybe throughout the week I'll just go back. But I'll have this video linked to it. Oh, whoops. I'll have this video linked to it, so then you can watch it. I'll also see if I can put like timestamps. So like, you know, oh, this question by yada 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 is here from this timestamp, that's timestamp. So if you ask the question, you can just cross-reference with the video. But yeah, I might go back and actually like type them out, but we'll see. But yes, guys, thank you again. A huge thanks to MensLib, Mikhail and Matt, especially everyone part of the MensLib. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think we talked about a lot of cool shit. And yeah. Oh yeah, and then tomorrow, if you check out my channel, I'm chatting with Mr. Rich Cooper from Entrepreneurs in Cars. He agreed to come on and talk about single moms. That's going to be interesting. But yeah, so yeah, tune in. That's tomorrow at 6 p.m. U.S. Central. But yes, everyone, thank you for joining. Thank you, MensLib. Thank you, Matt, Mikhail. Thank you, everyone. And we should do this again sometime. All right. Thank you, all, and have a good night.